700 years ago, the wrath of the mad dragon swept across the continent. 5 witches trained by the dragon chose to betray their master in order to protect humankind. They were the first to understand dragons far better than anyone else and learned how to protect themselves from them. Those witches subdued the dragon's fury, protected humanity, and established a new empire. A nation loved and revered across the continent, the Agan Empire, the Sacred Dawn. However, barbarians on horseback from the north soon came and defeated the emperor, and the nation's glory was destroyed. And the precious princess of that illustrious emperor, amid the cracked corridors of the palace, wore red shoes and a dress torn at one corner as she ran in panic. The sunlight streaming through the window illuminated her beautiful face. Her platinum hair billowed, and her bright golden eyes held nothing now but terror. Her whole body was drenched in sweat from fleeing. She was the princess of the Agan Empire, Elizabetta Asaika. At that moment, all she could do was clutch her cloak tightly around herself and force herself to run faster. Her breathing grew ragged after running for so long, and she told herself that if she were caught, her life would be over. To those barbarians, her retreating figure was fading farther and farther into the sunlight. The storm of fate that would sweep her away was beginning to rise. At the Vangelar military camp, soldiers ran about in a panic, shouting warnings. Warning! Warning! A woman from Agan has assassinated General Roderick. One of them shouted angrily at the others, "Find her at once." Inside one tent, a woman with bloodied legs stood leaning against the tent cloth. The Agan woman they were talking about was none other than Alice. Not only her legs, but her entire body and face were spattered with that general's blood. She slowly slid down the hanging cloth and covered her mouth and nose with both hands, because the sound of her uneven breathing would make her easy to discover. Even now, she was still in shock. Tears fell from the corners of her eyes as she could hardly believe she had run by mistake into the military camp of the enemy's ally. Then, cutting off her own thoughts, she glanced through a gap in the tent flap. A few hours earlier, beside that tent under the shade of a green tree, she had struggled and screamed, "Let me go." At the time, a man had pressed her against the tent and restrained her. In her panic, she heard him threaten, "You've got some nerve, sneaking in a Vangelar's camp like this. Agan women really are beautiful." He spoke those lecherous words right to her face without shame. Then he pressed his face close to her head. "I wonder if that runaway princess is as beautiful as you." In that desperate moment, she could only summon a small blue magic circle. "I have to use magic." The circle suddenly shone and grew many times larger. In the blink of an eye it vanished, replaced by a horrifyingly bloody scene. Blood from the man sprayed all over her. His body seemed to explode, and all he managed was a choked gasp. Her face went deathly pale, and her pupils shrank in terror. Looking at her blood-covered hands, she thought anxiously, what was that? I hadn't even touched the magic circle yet. She drew her hands back against her chest. Whatever the reason, an enemy soldier had died right in front of her. If she was caught, there would be no way for her to live. "If I'm going to die, surrounded by the enemy." As she said this, another small red magic circle appeared beneath her feet. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed one on it. It would be better to end my own life right now. But at the very moment she was about to cast the spell, she suddenly remembered a conversation from the Imperial Palace. Before they parted, her twin younger brother, Andrei Asaika, had held her by the shoulders and instructed her, "Listen carefully, Alice. The magic circle I made for you can be used for simple defense and attack. You only need to touch it and call my name. It's on your left ankle. But of course, I hope you'll never have to use it." Faintly visible at Alice's left ankle was that blazing red magic circle. Sobbing, she called his name, "Andre." He turned away and pushed her back. "Go now. Even if you survive only to become a slave, that is still better than dying here." She rushed forward, grabbed his clothes, and buried her face against him as she pleaded, "No, come with me. I'm not a powerful witch like you. If I'm all alone, Andre's face darkened, and he answered in a low voice, "I am the Emperor of Agan. I must protect the Imperial Palace at all costs." Then he raised his hand and cast another spell. Her eyes widened at the light before her as he continued, "If you survive, Alice, our dynasty will still have hope. That light transformed into a blue sphere that wrapped around her body. She struggled and pounded against its inner surface, trying to break free. Ondra, he spread his arms and lifted the sphere high, ignoring his sister's resistance. Always remember that. You must survive. From within the sphere, which was steadily rising higher, she watched his figure grow smaller and smaller as she quietly listened to his final words. Survive, and come back to bury me. After speaking those sorrowful words, he gave his sister a bright smile. Tears began to stream down her face. The shattered memories struck Alice, who had been about to kill herself, like a bucket of cold water. She clenched her hand tightly. Get a hold of yourself, Elizabetta. You are the last descendant of Agon's royal family and the heir to the throne. She lurched to her feet, her eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. I have to survive, even if only to comfort Andre's soul. She stepped closer to the tent flap. First I have to get out of here, then go to Rigel. Rigel is an ally of Agon, so they will definitely help me. As she lightly lifted the flap, she heard a voice from outside the camp. General, are you in there? Her heart seemed to skip a beat, and her eyes turned vacant. Then she heard footsteps behind her, slowly drawing near. The silhouette of a tall man approached. She froze in fear. Who is it? She glanced behind her. This tent isn't empty. The man stepped into the light, and his voice rang out. Is something the matter? The person outside answered, General Roderick has been murdered by an Agon woman. Little by little, she made out the figure standing before her, and her expression grew slightly calmer. It was Grand Duke Curson. Before her stood a man with jet black hair and vivid blue eyes, staring suspiciously at the woman in front of him. 3 years earlier, at the birthday celebration of Andreas Saika, Emperor of Agon, the banquet had been held in the imperial palace, and the attending nobles chatted and laughed merrily with one another. Andreas Saika, dressed in formal red attire, smiled gently at Alice. Alice, are you all right? Wearing a red dress, Alice looked a little distracted when she heard her brother call her. He walked over, lowered his head, and asked with concern, You could go back to your room and rest for a while if you want. She smiled and replied, I'm Euphina. Her face flushed a little with irritation. People keep talking about me because you keep hiding me away. Hearing that, he could only laugh awkwardly in helplessness. She grumbled in annoyance. In love with his own twin sister? How dare they even say that? Then suddenly her eyes lit up as she looked towards something. He followed her gaze and asked, What is it? Oh, is it him? Lowering his eyes, he asked her that as he looked at the man. That man was Election Kiston, captain of the Knights of Vangelar, a northern nation. The noble ladies began whispering excitedly about him. People say he's the emperor's half-brother, but he doesn't have the slightest bit of royal bearing. Some even say the late emperor's lover had him before the marriage. But he also played an important role in placing the current emperor on the throne, which is why he was granted the title of Grand Duke. There were many rumors about his birth, and how someone like him was unworthy of being the emperor's elder brother. Yet he kept winning battle after battle, as if to prove his worth. Everyone called him the battle maniac or the emperor's warhound. Hearing that, she was briefly taken aback. But no matter what, one thing was certain. Nothing good ever came from getting involved with him. Returning to the present, she stared at him in stunned silence. Her face tightened uneasily. If he saw me at that banquet, then he may have recognized me as the Princess of Agon. The person outside the tent was growing impatient and raised his voice. Your Grace, please give us your orders. In fright, she turned around, and he also glanced toward the tent entrance. Her whole body trembled, her hand clutching her clothes tightly as tears ran down her cheeks. It's over. My life will end here. She squeezed her eyes shut as if waiting for judgment on her fate. I'll see you soon, Andre. Suddenly he said, Leave. The person outside the tent sounded startled and asked, Sir? I said get outside. He replied calmly. Only then did she open her eyes, a huge question mark practically written across her face, unable to understand what was happening. Then, all of a sudden, he dropped to one knee before her. Princess of Agon. His sudden action startled her, and she instinctively stepped back. He raised his face to look at her. Please forgive me, Your Highness. The candles in the room were lit, their flames flickering and spreading warmth throughout the tent. Wringing out a towel, he said to her, I thought it would be unwise for them to see you in this state. May I touch you, Your Highness? He turned back and held out his hand before her. She froze, then reacted. What? You intend to? She answered only after looking at her clothes. She raised a hand and looked at the bloodstains. These bloodstains, they came from that strange white light that appeared earlier. It killed a general who had been about to violate her, and these streaks of blood were his. She gazed darkly at her hand, thinking it over carefully. I'm certain something burst out from my body, but if it wasn't the magic circle, then what was it? Your Highness. His voice snapped her out of her thoughts. She looked up, saw him step closer, and answered, Yes. Ah, yes, please. Hearing her reply, he swept her hair aside. Excuse me. Her ears flushed slightly red. He used the towel to wipe the blood from her neck, then her shoulders and back. She let out a soft sound and slowly opened her eyes. It seemed he did not regard her as an enemy. She looked at the man, carefully wiping the blood from her before her. At such close range, she looked straight into his eyes. I will survive and leave this place. He dropped the bloody towel into a basin of water and said, I'm finished. Thank you, she replied softly. Then he called to the person outside. Come in, General. Yes, sir. A young man in armor with a sword at his waist stepped inside, his expression displeased. I mean, what the hell have you been doing? Then his eyes widened and his mouth fell open when he saw the woman sitting on the bed. In shock, he pointed at Alice and blurted out, She's the one who assassinated General Roderick. In response to his alarm, the man said calmly, Pay your respects to Her Highness the Princess at once. What? Her Highness the Princess? Reuben asked in confusion. His face darkened as he heard the explanation. She is the last descendant of Agon's royal family. Treat her well. As he said this, he cast her a glance, and she looked back at him, her eyes slightly unsettled because she could sense it. When he said those words, his voice had dropped low. It sounded a little frightening, and his gaze had turned razor-sharp. Then he turned back to look at her and spoke words steeped in gloom. On this final journey of yours, in an instant, the whole room was filled with killing intent, and she stiffened in fear. That night, 2 soldiers stood watch outside Alice's tent, carrying out their duty properly. Inside, Alice had not touched the dinner on the table. The food was still warm, but all she could think about were Curson's words to her. Treat her properly on this final journey. His painfully cruel words made her wonder, does he think I can eat after hearing something like that? If he wants me dead, why not just do it now? Suddenly, she heard the 2 guards outside talking among themselves. Is she really the last descendant of the Agon Empire? They gossiped in hushed voices, as if assuming Alice could not hear them. The twin sister, the Emperor, hid away all this time. Shouldn't she be dealt with immediately? It seems the Grand Duke has already sent a letter to the Emperor asking what should be done. I think a reply will come soon. Their conversation was drawing toward its end. Also, watch your mouth. You shouldn't speak so rudely about someone from Agon's royal family. But still, the moment one of the 2 soldiers mentioned it, wasn't that kingdom already destroyed? When they spoke of Andre, Alice gripped her skirt tightly. I mean, the emperor has passed away, so their nation is as good as gone. Even so, don't underestimate them. Do you really know nothing about the legend behind the founding of that empire? Their discussion continued to drift inside. Of course I do. They were the ones who saved the continent from the dragons. Meanwhile, Alice was grieving inwardly, silently calling for her younger brother, Andre. She remembered his gentle smile. Her only family, the person she had relied on most, was gone. At the same time, she remembered their final parting. His farewell really had been his last wish, and she alone had survived. Even so, Alice wiped away her tears and steeled herself. This is no time to cry. I have to save myself. She tried to think of a way to survive. First, I need to learn whether there is any information about Vangeler that might save me. Outside, the 2 soldiers were still chatting noisily. In any case, I'm just happy to be heading home. But even so, the Grand Duke doesn't get any rest or relaxation at all. This time, they were talking about election. Why not? Don't you know? His Majesty keeps nagging every time he sees him. It sounded like they were talking about the matter everyone had been buzzing about lately. The Emperor wanted his older brother to marry and have children as soon as possible. Their voices carried all the way into the tent. Is that so? I mean, it would be such a waste if his precious bloodline ended. But then again, he isn't exactly an ordinary man, is he? In their words, Alice noticed something important. How could he possibly find a woman strong enough to bear a dragon's child? From what she knew, the children born of dragons, the dragon offspring she had read about as a child, were creatures unlike humans. The book said they had low intelligence and poor social skills. And because the mad dragon's blood surged through their veins, They would become frenzied at the slightest opportunity, terrible monsters with frightening traits. The fact that Election-Kisten was a dragon's child astonished her a little. But Lord Election-Kisten, imagining that gentle man carrying such mad blood, made her wonder, a dragon's child? Time returned to 5 days earlier, also at night. Alice woke inside the tent. Election entered together with a servant and courteously bowed to her. "Good evening, Your Highness." The moment she saw him, all she could manage was a stiff smile. Looking at the dagger and vial of poison on the servant's tray, a thought suddenly surfaced in her mind. Bringing back the princess of a fallen dynasty is no different from leading yourself straight to your death. After a long silence, she finally asked, "Are these formalities truly necessary?" Instead of answering, Election simply opened the letter in his hand and said, "This is a message from the Emperor." He began reading the contents of the letter the Emperor had sent to Elisabetta. "I wish to grant you a mission, last princess of Agon, the chance to end your life by your own hand." The Emperor had given her two choices. Would she choose an honorable death, or be taken to the capital of Vangelar to be executed by guillotine? When he reached that point, Election coldly uttered the final two words, "Choose." At that moment, Elisabetta said nothing. She thought to herself, being allowed to choose the way she left this world truly was a mercy, and an honorable death was the most glorious death of all. For a princess of a fallen empire, that final consideration would let her preserve her dignity before her enemies. Her hand tightened around the blanket in determination. But dignity was not what mattered most when her goal was to survive at any cost. Only then did Election finish reading the letter. "That is all, Your Highness." Elisabetta kept staring at him, because she knew this man was the strongest one here, the man with the highest standing in the camp. There was one thing she knew about him. He was also someone being pressured to produce an heir as quickly as possible. She knew exactly what burden he carried, a child of dragons, one who had inherited dragon blood. After a moment of silence, Elisabetta finally called out, "Sir Election." Then she asked him directly, "If I do not kill myself right now, you will take me to Vangelar, correct?" Election replied coldly, "If you do not choose to end your own life." As he answered her question, she kept staring at the small dagger on the tray. "His Majesty ordered me to escort you safely to the capital of Vangelar." Then she picked up the dagger and asked him in return, "Safely? Those are your words." He still answered in a stern voice, "Yes, Your Highness." Elisabetta kept her unwavering gaze on the dagger as she thought, "I do not know whether this plan will succeed. I can only hope." She understood perfectly well that Sir Election was a man who kept his word, a man who would do anything to honor a promise. So she declared with certainty, "I will not kill myself." Her voice rang out flatly under Election's astonished gaze. "That means you are responsible for taking me to Vangelar safely and without harm, just as you said." Suddenly, Elisabetta raised the dagger high. Blood splattered, and Election was horrified. Anxiously, he shouted, "Your Highness!" Bright red drops of blood fell to the floor, mixed with Elisabetta's faint call. "Sir Election," she smiled and said, "no matter what happens, you must take me safely to Vangelar." After saying that, she began to lose consciousness. Through her fading vision, she saw Election calling out in panic, "Your Highness!" Even as she slipped toward unconsciousness, Elisabetta remained resolute. No matter what she had to do, no matter what she had to endure, she told herself, "I must survive." The reason she wanted to live so badly was simple, because she was the last descendant of Agon's royal family. Inside the utterly silent tent, Election sat by the bed watching Elisabetta. He simply sat there in silence, looking at her. Then he thought about her reckless action. She kept hurting herself every time he tried to keep his distance from her. He thought to himself that this princess did not merely refuse to die easily. She had no intention of dying at all. What she was doing left him troubled. Is she trying to defeat me? With a sharp mind, he understood one thing clearly. He could not believe she would use the Emperor's order to secure her own safety. Suddenly, a memory surfaced in his mind. It was back at Agon's palace, with princes and nobles whispering among themselves. Is that the princess from the rumors? Their lively chatter had reached Election's ears. Then he heard them exclaim in admiration, "My God!" It turned out they had been captivated by Elisabetta's beauty. No wonder His Majesty decided to hide her away. She is far too beautiful. Even Election himself had been left speechless by her. So lost in that memory was he that he did not notice Elizabetta had awakened and was asking him, "Are you always this silent, Sir Election?" Seeing that she was awake, he hurriedly asked, "You're awake?" But she called out sternly, "Sir Election." Her next words seemed meant to expose the falseness of his concern. "You know I was never asleep." Then she asked, "Am I wrong?" When Election did not bother to answer, Elizabetta realized he seemed to be trying to avoid speaking with her. So she placed a hand over her wound and called softly, "Sir Election." In a measured voice, she asked, "How many more times must I stab myself?" She looked pitiful as she challenged him. "Only then will you speak to me properly?" Faced with that accusation, Election could only let out a helpless sigh. Then he reminded her coldly, "I think you ought to learn how to keep yourself safe, Your Highness." But Elizabetta did not care and merely said, "In any case, when we reach Vandeleur, I will die anyway." The moment his hand no longer rested on hers, realizing he was about to leave, she hurriedly grabbed his hand tightly. Her hesitant voice broke the silence. "Sir Election, are you?" Her question surprised him slightly. "The married?" After a stunned pause, Election replied, "No, I am not." After receiving his answer, Elizabetta continued, "Why not? You must surely have many suitable prospects." At that, he sat down and brought up the rumors people spread about him. "Perhaps you have not heard, but there are many rumors about me." He said frankly, no one wants to give their precious daughter to someone who is not even fully human. Elizabetta paid no attention to those words and only kept staring at him. This man truly was no ordinary person. She knew perfectly well why no one wished to marry their daughter to him. A child born of a dragon, half dragon blood and half human blood, a body that was never fixed, neither dragon nor human. Because they inherited the madness of dragons, they had to kill constantly to control their bloodlust. A cursed race. So Elizabetta finally said, "Those rumors are all exaggerated." Then she spoke of the trouble Election was facing over marriage. "I have heard that the Emperor of Vandeleur is pressuring you about an heir. You are a knight loyal to the Emperor, so if you refuse to obey." Before she could finish, Election cut her off. "Your Highness," he insisted firmly, "I have no intention of killing a woman merely to produce a child." His tone was absolute, "And I have no desire for my bed sheets to be soaked in blood." After saying that, Election's gaze dropped lower. He noticed Elizabetta's trembling hand still clutching his and wondered, what is she trying to do by holding my hand like this? She's trembling so badly. Suddenly, Elizabetta spoke. "I am sure that would terrify any ordinary woman." Unexpectedly, she brought up her own bloodline. "But do you know that the founder of the Agan Empire was a servant of dragons? And that very source of power, the power of witches, still exists in the bloodline of Agan's royal family." Hearing this, Election asked, "Then are you a witch, Your Highness?" Elizabetta answered calmly, "Perhaps you could call it that, though it depends on how you define it." Then she asked, "There are many legends passed down from generation to generation within Agan's royal house, Sir Election. Have you heard them?" Instead of answering, Election only thought about what she had just said. Dragons. Servants of dragons. Children of dragons. He looked at Elizabetta's self-assured face and realized that she was trying to find a connection between the two of them. He understood why she had brought up her own lineage to win his sympathy. Everything she did made him wonder, but why? He could not understand it. Even though she had been granted an honorable death, one befitting her noble status, why would she choose this far more difficult path instead? Then Election finally spoke. "Your Highness." Elizabetta answered gently, "Yes." The cruel words he uttered filled her with horror. "I cannot help you." He emphasized it further. "Nor do I have any intention of helping you." At last, he reminded Elizabetta, "So do not deceive yourself any longer." In a pleading voice, Elizabetta said, "Even if I were willing to kneel at your feet?" "How ridiculous, Your Highness." "Then what if I wept and begged for my life? Would that soften your heart?" "That would only make things harder for me." Pain filled her eyes. "So kneeling and begging you is absurd, but trying to kill myself in front of you is acceptable?" Election laid bare his thoughts. "I understand now." She tightened her grip on his sinewy hand. "But for now, you still have to stay by my side." Her eyes brimmed with tenderness. "Do not leave me alone for even one more moment." He bent down and answered, "If that is what you wish of me." Elizabetta replied as well, "I am sorry if this inconveniences you." She still held his hand tightly. "But if, as you say, I could die at any moment." That instantly made Election freeze. She gently lowered her head and pressed a warm kiss to his hand. Her shining eyes were full of unspoken feelings. "Then is this not the last thing you can do for me?" In the heavily guarded camp of Vangeler's nightly order, Election sat watch while Elisabetta slept deeply. Suddenly, in her sleep, she murmured Andre's name again and again. In the dream, that person appeared, standing by her bedside and calling her name. Elisabetta. It was Andre Isaika, her beloved little brother. She raised a hand, wanted to touch him. I should have become queen. I should have become queen before I died. Tears streamed down her face, so that you could live and restore our kingdom. His eyes also shimmered as he looked at her. You have always been the most capable one. He answered her, I am nothing without you, Elisabetta. The boy gently let go of her hand. Listen to me. You are stronger and more wonderful than you think. He wanted to comfort her one last time, wiping away her tears. No matter what happens, you are still Agon's princess. You deserve love and respect. Elisabetta was still utterly heartbroken. No. If you knew what I am planning, you would despise me. But Andre, I promise I will return and build you a proper grave. While she dreamed, Election watched everything. Even he felt sorrow for her. I had heard she was fragile, but I did not think it was this bad. Then suddenly she seemed to feel freezing cold. Seeing her in such a pitiful state made it hard for him to restrain himself. There was always a reason emotions rose and bloomed, even if he had met her only once 3 years ago. Her image had remained engraved in his mind all these years. She was like a precious crystal he could never reach. The woman he had met at the darkest moment of his life. She had shone like the sun. It truly made it hard for him to control his feelings. This feeling must be because I remember that time. He reached out and touched her flushed cheek. She is burning up. Then his hand brushed the back of her neck, and she reacted to the gesture at once. You. Her eyes stared at him questioningly. You truly are difficult to understand, Election. Embarrassed, he immediately drew back. Did I wake you? But she suddenly pulled him closer. Sir Election, she said. Then she kept asking him when I reached the capital. She leaned close to his ear and whispered, Please do not be angry with me. Her words were utterly sincere. Think of it as my final stop. Election deliberately challenged her. I do not understand what you are talking about. Her eyes were desperate. Even if you think I am insane, I beg you. Those were her last words before she fainted. Please remember that I may still be of value to you. Time passed quickly, and the journey to Vangeler began. Elisabetta suddenly woke on horseback, or more precisely, on the journey to her execution. Election said to the troop, We will make camp tonight. Then he told her, Please wait in here for a while we prepare your quarters. She did not want to trouble everyone. I can rest anywhere. He even asked after her with concern. Your fever has returned. The journey will have to be delayed again. Realizing the reason, she answered, I see. So I am the one causing the delay. Not exactly. His response surprised her a little. It also startled the soldiers around them. Her anxious eyes swept the surroundings. It feels like everyone is trying to avoid me. A wave of insecurity washed over her. Am I that filthy? Suddenly, she looked into the distance and saw a beautiful stretch of water. It seems there is a lake over there. She continued looking that way. Is it really that direction? Seeing her head that way, he quickly followed. What is it? Elisabetta spoke of her intention. I think I saw a lake in the forest. May I bathe there? Her words left him speechless. Then Election suddenly spoke, startling everyone into turning toward the two of them. I will go with you. She was rather surprised. Forgive me, but are you truly going to accompany me? Yes, she asked awkwardly. If it is because you fear I might run away, wait. She suddenly halted and thought to herself, this may be an opportunity. If many people know he and I were alone together, it may be useful later. So she agreed at once. Very well. She stepped toward him on her own and declared, Let us go together. Under the bright moonlight, the two of them walked together toward the lake. Election carefully checked the water. It is very cold. Can you bear it? She answered yes. He kept reminding her, Be careful not to let water get into your wound. Elisabetta then began removing her clothes layer by layer. I should test him a little. Election had not changed much since the first time they met, but I still remember his body heat from that day, when he held me in his arms. So she calmly removed her outer garments in front of him. Beneath the moonlight, her beautiful figure began to show. She called out to him, Sir Election. Then suddenly a voice came from behind. Your Highness. He immediately seized her robe and pulled it closed. It is still cold. Her eyes remained full of desire. But I truly want to bathe. He fastened the buttons on her clothes for her. Your fever only broke 3 days ago. Then he added, and one more thing, do not test me. Your Highness. Leaning close to her ear, Election whispered, I already told you that I will not help you. Those words truly shattered her illusion. The princess of the Agan Empire stood before her enemy, the commander of the army, in a vulgar state. Even so, she still stubbornly acted like a cheap whore. He still maintained the bearing of a noble knight. He kept reminding her, there's a lot of moss on the rocks, so it could be very slippery. We'll reach a village tomorrow and stay there for the night. So please try to endure just for today. His eyes were full of resolve. I can't drag this plan out any longer, and besides... Suddenly, she cut him off. I'll only wash my hands and feet. Then she walked toward the lake. She lightly touched the clear water with her foot. If he is truly such an upright man, I wonder whether he will forgive what I am about to do once we arrive in Vangelar. A month and a half had passed since I was captured in Vangelar. It was nearly mid-March. At last, we had reached the seat of the strongest power in the northern continent, the great Vangelar Empire. The mighty procession advanced toward the city palace. As Election was helping Elisabetta down from the horse, a soldier ran up and called out, "Duke." Reuben bashfully avoided his gaze. "What is it?" "Yes, sir." She also overheard what the man said to him. "It's Xanost, crown prince of the kingdom of Ugal. I didn't expect him to be at the palace." Suddenly, a man approached them and offered a greeting. "You must be Grand Duke Kiston." He was the fourth prince. I heard he was keeping the princess of Agan prisoner. He scrutinized her. So that's her, from Ugal. So he was Agan's enemy, the very one who had brought suffering upon her kingdom. The very thought made her tremble with rage. Election seemed to understand her hatred as well. The man continued taunting. "I went all the way to Agan's royal palace just to see that famed beauty praised by the world, but it seems your highness escaped." Xanost even sneered at her. "I heard she was so beautiful that nothing could compare. So you can imagine how disappointed I was." At that, he frowned. "That is also why I came all the way here, to ask your elder brother, the man who holds power in Vangelar, for a favor. I wanted to confirm that she was safe, healthy, and untouched." He bowed as he gave a mocking smile. "Since you went to the trouble of capturing her, allow me to handle the rest in your place." To her shock, he immediately reached out, trying to seize her. Elisabetta was frightened. "That's right, come closer and capture me." So she had already prepared a plan. "The moment that filthy hand reaches me, I'll activate the magic circle." But unexpectedly, a voice rang out and stopped him. "Please step back." Xanost flared with anger when Election blocked him. "What the hell are you doing?" Election answered firmly. "I was entrusted with bringing her to the imperial capital. I have yet to receive any notice that she is to be handed over to the kingdom of Ugal." His voice carried authority. "In order to turn a prisoner of war over to you, I require the approval of the Emperor of Vangelar. In other words, until I receive His Majesty's orders, Princess Agan remains." His sharp gaze fixed on the man. "She still belongs to Vangelar. Or, at the very least, she is my property." Those words stirred something in her that she could hardly suppress. Then he turned to her and said, "If you understand, let us go." And so the two of them left behind Xanost's fury. His eyes burned with resentment. "Just you wait." Inside the palace, a voice greeted him. "Welcome back, Duke. You've done well." Emperor Noir asked Election, "How? Is the princess? Quite stubborn, isn't she?" "Indeed, but manageable, your majesty." He seemed somewhat puzzled. "I thought she would choose to end her own life, since Agan's royal family was said to hold honor above all else. Yet by choosing to endure the long journey here, it seems she has some other intention." It seemed they had also realized why she had accepted things that way. Election recalled what she had said that day. "From now on, stay by my side. Please do not leave me alone, not even for a moment." Blushing, she had softly said, "When I reach the capital, please do not hate me." As he drifted through those thoughts, the Emperor suddenly informed him, "Ugal is demanding that we hand her over to them. They want to cut off her head with their own hands." The words pained him. "Cut off her head?" "That's right. They want to keep her head and put on display." He asked the Emperor, "Have you agreed to that, your majesty?" "We cannot let them do such a thing to the final descendant of the Agan Empire. I agreed that she would be hanged in the town square, and that afterward her body would be turned over to them." Election pressed on. "When is her execution?" "Within 5 days." Hearing that only deepened his turmoil. 5 days? Noir began to muse. "I can hardly believe that a splendid lineage like Agan's would collapse in this manner. If that young emperor had not been so obstinate, perhaps Agan would still exist." Then he gave his own opinion. "If I were him, I would have done anything to appease Ugal. but Election did not seem to be listening closely. The emperor asked him, "You're not listening to me. I would never dare, your majesty." "Nwalogt, you're always so honest, my little brother. I can tell the moment you lie. It's written all over your face, you know." Yet he still tried to deny it. "I am not." "Then why are you like this?" He thought for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, the emperor struck right at the heart of it. "Did something happen between you and her on the way here?" Noir's question was not easy to answer. Election remained silent. Then, closing his eyes, he replied flatly, "No." And yet the alluring image of her that night was impossible for him to forget. Her shining eyes had called his name. "Sir Election." Even so, he still insisted there was nothing. The emperor said bluntly, "Whatever happened, take today to rest. Even a dragon's child needs rest. Oh, and one more thing." He added, "At the very least, you should look over the pile of potential brides on the table." "How long are you planning to keep me waiting, Commander?" Noir's gaze turned threatening. "Do not forget, my brother, why I bestowed that title upon you. It was a reminder, a dragon bearing human qualities, truly a pure blood." The emperor continued, "I cannot allow such perfect blood to go to waste. What do you think? Do you want to cooperate with me?" In response to Noir's prodding, he said, "I have told you many times, your majesty. Bearing children is too difficult for me. Even marriage is the same." Election said harshly, "Even if a human woman were somehow able to conceive my child, she would die before she could give birth." Yet the emperor remained persistent. "I'll shorten the list and leave only the healthiest women, so at least take a look." His eyes were frightening. "Our mother succeeded, did she not?" He said it outright. "It was our mother who gave birth to you, Election. Are you not living proof yourself?" Those words made him falter. Election turned his back and walked away. "I will go rest now, your majesty." Noir shouted after him, "You stubborn fool who hates the very idea of marriage." "Fine then, be alone." Election strode down the hallway, irritated after their conversation. He thought, listen to him talk. A woman who could not give birth no matter how long she labored. And that monster tore open her belly just to see the light of day. Every dragon child is born that way, and every woman carrying such a child dies in the same manner. Election clutched his head in splitting pain. He must be obsessed with that idea only because he never had to witness such a sight with his own eyes. I should return to Rotier before I bring more trouble upon myself. Before leaving, he thought to himself, should I at least see her once before I go? It seemed he was still hesitating. Yet with a heavy heart he thought, what would that change? Now, Elisabetta was sitting alone in the dungeon, curled up on herself. He had brought her there in handcuffs. She wondered why she had been shackled. He too looked at her in pain. Only then did she understand the problem. And yet he had done something unexpectedly gentle. Election removed the handcuffs and tied a strip of cloth instead so that she would not suffer as much. This way, your wrists will hurt less. Remembering that moment moved her a little. He was truly mysterious. But suddenly, a dreadful feeling came over her. Oh no! Xenos suddenly appeared before her and threatened her. The Emperor himself is rather handsome. But in truth, he is nothing compared to you. Elisabetta recoiled in fear when she saw him. Xanost, you remember my name? What an honor. Though truly, you are very beautiful. His words disgusted her. What? He said bluntly, don't pretend you know nothing. Do you think I don't know the Emperor poured all his magic into you before he died? Elisabetta trembled. Andres Malchik? Was he talking about the magic circle? But only Andre and I could see it. That was our secret. He grabbed the bars of the cell. But that doesn't matter anymore. Then he began to reveal his true intention. There's just one thing I want to verify before your execution, whether or not you are a witch. Elisabetta was terrified by his words. Standing before Elisabetta's trembling figure, Xanost questioned her sternly. There's just one thing I want to verify before your execution, whether or not you are a witch. Delighted, Xanost stretched his large hand toward her. Inside, Elisabetta screamed in fear, no, I have to do something. At that moment, she squeezed her eyes shut, then slowly opened them when she noticed something falling. At the same time, foam suddenly formed at his mouth, and he collapsed to the ground. Elisabetta was too stunned to speak when she saw the figure of the person who had struck Xanost unconscious. Looking at that handsome face, she recognized him at once and called his name. Sir Election. Elisabetta stared blankly at that face for a long time. The atmosphere in the cell suddenly became silent. She thought to herself, I still cannot guess what this man intends. With the handcuffs in her hands, Elisabetta quietly clenched the corner of her clothes. He showed pity to a prisoner condemned to death. Then she glanced at Zanost sprawled on the floor and realized he had protected her from being defiled by a barbaric brute. Elisabetta silently looked up at him. Sad thoughts filled her mind. Could it all be the Emperor's orders? Just as Election turned to leave, she wrestled with the question in her head. Or was he simply fulfilling the duty of a knight by helping the weak? Whatever the reason, Elisabetta hesitated for a long while before finally speaking. Thank you. Then she pressed her lips together and swallowed the rest back down. Oh, I am sorry. Elisabetta silently watched his figure depart. Election Kisten, I cannot let you leave. After some time, the early light of dawn shone through the leaves. Beneath the sun stood a grand and magnificent castle. Today was the day Elisabetta Asaika was to be executed. At the same time, Reuben hurried over to report. Everything is prepared, sir. He seriously laid out the plan. Now all we need to do is load the treasures His Majesty bestowed upon you onto the carriage. Election held the reins and answered calmly, very well. We'll depart as soon as that is done. Hearing that, Reuben asked in surprise, You aren't planning to go to town square? He replied indifferently, Why would I? Reuben stammered awkwardly as he scratched his head. Well, looking at the clock as the time approached, he reminded him, Today is the day of Princess Agin's execution. I heard it will take place at noon, so it should begin soon. The crowd has been gathering since early morning. Reuben excitedly emphasized what a special event it was. The execution of Grandel's peerless beauty. This is going to be perfect gossip for the townspeople. He laughed as he went on. Some people are even hoping the princess will use sorcery and disappear like a miracle. And before Reuben could finish, Election sharply cut him off. That's enough. He shot him an irritated sideways glance. Stop talking nonsense and check everything again so we don't leave anything behind. I have no plans to return to the capital anytime soon. Hearing that, Reuben stared in alarm and asked, You really aren't going? Election answered coldly, Why should I? Reuben shyly blurted out, Because you looked after her for nearly 2 months. He shut his eyes tightly, trying to hold back the rest of his words. He recalled the moments the two of them had shared. They seemed rather close, intimate, private. Unconcerned, Election coldly ordered, Stop wasting time. Prepare to depart. Hearing that, Reuben looked a little saddened as he watched him mount his horse and wondered, So nothing happened between them after all? Really? Election gripped the reins firmly in his hand. Just then, the clock struck 12 and the bells began to ring. He lifted his face and looked toward the clock. Without saying much, Election murmured heavily, Let's depart. At that moment, a servant came running up in haste. Your Grace, she reported, panting, His Majesty summons you at once. What the maid said next made his pupils constrict. The Princess of Agin. Back at the splendid castle, Noir spoke thoughtfully. Now, then, seated on his throne with his chin resting on his hand, he asked, I hear you have something to say to me, Princess? Noir raised a brow in suspicion. And what might that be? Elisabetta lowered her head in silence, not speaking at once. She mulled over the turmoil in her mind. It was already too late to die an honorable death. The people of Agin had dearly loved a princess they had never even seen. Yet I have done nothing to deserve their devotion. Even though I had the perfect excuse, I was still a princess. I turned my back on everyone and ran away so I could live. Therefore, I must survive. Elisabetta clung tightly to that memory in her heart, to build a gravestone for her younger brother, who had died in loneliness, and to try to comfort the souls of Agin's unfortunate people who had suffered the ravages of barbarians. Seeing that she still had not spoken, Noir urged, Princess. At that moment, she clenched her hand and thought to herself, I have imagined this moment hundreds of times over the past month. The very next second, Elisabetta suddenly blurted out. Blushing, she then declared in earnest, I am pregnant. The father of the child is Grand Duke Kisten. Elisabetta was certain of one thing. This moment would change her fate. Hearing that, Noir stared blankly and repeated, Princess, what did you just say? Seeing the determination in her eyes, he asked again in a daze, Did I hear incorrectly? You just said you were carrying the Duke's child. Elisabetta declared firmly, You did not hear wrong. Noir fell silent and bit down hard, thinking to himself, Election spent the night with a woman on the battlefield? Impossible. He could not accept it and frowned. Then Moore looked into the shimmering eyes of the woman before him and hesitated. Wait. As he took in the full elegance of her face, Moore privately concluded that it was not entirely impossible. Her very form seemed to radiate light, and for a moment he was left staring. Moore raised a hand, coughed a few times, then replied, I'm not sure whether you know this, but even if he told you sincerely, Grand Duke Kiston is a dragon, and it is extremely difficult for a human to bear a dragon's child. Hearing that, Elisabetta shook her head in fear. After learning the situation, Moore frowned and pressed her further. So, you know nothing? If you aren't certain, then why do you know you're pregnant? Do you have any proof? She paused thoughtfully before continuing carefully. My twin younger brother was a mage. Elisabetta gently pulled back her sleeve and explained he could check his health by examining the flow of magic in his body. She slowly touched her arm, then cast a magic circle. Although I'm not a mage like him, I can still sense even the slightest trace of magic. At that moment, a pure light flared up, and she was able to feel that something in her body was different. Witnessing the miracle before his eyes, Noir was stunned, speechless. A moment later, he finally asked suspiciously, Is this your way of escaping a death sentence? Elisabetta answered seriously, That depends on your judgment, your majesty. At such a critical moment, Moore looked at her worried face and replied, Princess, actually, he continued in a stern voice, speaking the truth. That depends on. Just then, the door outside suddenly opened, and Election entered with an expressionless face as Noir finished his sentence. The Grand Duke's judgment. Step by step, he approached her. Noir, having completely lost patience, demanded, Is what the princess said true, Grand Duke? Election remained silent and only stared at her quietly. Seeing Elisabetta kneeling on the ground, Noir urgently shouted, Answer me. Election coldly and calmly made a request. Please allow me to speak with the princess in private first. Hearing that, Noir flew into a rage and barked. That is not what matters right now. Election nodded and helped her up. I will take that as permission. After that, the two of them left of their own accord, ignoring Noir as he shouted from the throne, You. Then he angrily turned his head and called out, General Zabin. Startled at being named, the young man answered, Yes, your majesty. Trembling with fury, Noir rubbed his head and asked through clenched teeth, Explain clearly everything that happened between the Grand Duke and the princess on your way back to the capital. Staring at the two figures leaving, he shouted an order, Do not leave out a single detail. Tell me everything. The scene shifted outside to the palace garden, where Election rebuked her in confusion. Have you gone mad? He asked in bewilderment. What were you thinking? Elisabetta stammered like a child who had done something wrong. First of all, please let me apologize, sir. Before she could finish, Election cut her off. I did not ask for an apology. Seeing the remorse on her face, he continued pressing her. I'm asking why you said such a pointless lie. Elisabetta pressed her lips together for a moment, then softly said, Sir. She honestly voiced what both of them already understood. You know why. Elisabetta lowered her head and explained sincerely, I didn't want to lie. There are things I must do, and I have to survive by any means. Election did not hesitate to criticize her, making her hand unconsciously clutch the hem of her dress. If that's the case, then you should have found another way to deal with it yourself instead of dragging me into this. There must have been a better way. Hearing that, Elisabetta stammered, If I had tried another way. She lifted her face, her eyes soaked with tears. Would you have allowed it? Seeing that, he tried to explain, At the very least, I would have thought of an alternative if I had known you. Before he could finish, Elisabetta interrupted. No, she coldly rebuked him. Don't lie anymore, Sir Election. Elisabetta spoke bluntly without the slightest fear. You don't have to pretend you were willing to listen to me. She continued bitterly through sobs. You completely ignored me. Elisabetta confronted him and made her point. You told me many times that you had no intention of helping me, and that I should have died outside the castle. You did show me a little generosity beyond pity, but I know you do not want me to survive. Without hesitation, she went straight to the point. I heard that the Emperor of Vangelar desperately wants you to have a child. Elisabetta then made a bold proposal. I will bear you a child. Her eyes were wet, tears streaming down her face, but her voice was resolute. Please, try to make use of me, Sir Election. In the silent garden, Elisabetta continued with understanding. It must be troublesome to have the Emperor constantly pressuring you to produce an heir. She shyly turned her face to the side. So I believe this is also a good opportunity for you. At once, Election gravely repeated, "You will bear a child for me." He stepped closer, making her recoil in surprise. "Sir, what are you saying?" Election ground his teeth and enunciated each word darkly. "Are you trying to die in the most miserable way possible?" He continued advancing. "This is only a marriage contract." Election asked unhappily, "Do you know why the Emperor has still failed to force me to produce a child?" He seized her wrist, then coldly ordered, "I hope you will never propose such a foolish plan again." Election then indifferently voiced the desire behind her plan: to survive. As he held Elisabetta's small wrist, he imagined that with only a slight squeeze, he could easily snap it. Looking at the guarded expression on her face, Election said mockingly, "I suppose I must look like a fool in your eyes." He continued in confusion, "Or perhaps you are gravely misunderstanding something." Election fell silent in thought. If she knew what thoughts were circling in my head. When his gaze fell on her soft lips, he thought, "Every time I look at her." Election stared at her lovely face. Would she still look at me that way? Hearing that, Elisabetta turned her face away uneasily. "I'm sorry for damaging your reputation, but once again, he stated with absolute certainty, I told you that I cannot help you." Election quietly released her arm. "But I never stopped you from finding a way to survive." He continued, laying out another option. "If I were you, I would kneel and beg for His Majesty's mercy with everything I had." While she rubbed her wrist, Election listed every possibility. Secrets only you know about Agon, treasures, even legends about dragons. At that, Elisabetta immediately spoke up. "Sir," she answered carefully, "I may be willing to sell my dignity and pride, but I cannot sell the country that my brother and so many others sacrificed their lives to protect." Elisabetta's eyes burned with fierce resolve as she declared patriotically, "My life is nothing compared to Agon." Seeing that, Election countered, "Then you should not have chosen such a graceful death if you truly cared about Agon's dignity." Realizing she could not persuade him, sadness filled Elisabetta's eyes. It seemed he would rather she kill herself. She recalled her past. He wasn't wrong. "Even with all my efforts, I still could not change this world or rebuild Agon, even if I managed to return there." And just as she faltered, she remembered the last time Andre protected her. "As long as you remain alive, Elisabetta, our empire will not completely collapse." Holding her younger brother's final words close to her heart, she thought, "How can I die after hearing that?" She gathered her resolve once more and tried again to change his mind. "I am completely different from ordinary women." Elisabetta began speaking of what useful qualities she had. "Although I am not a mage like my brother, I can still use." Before she could finish, Election interrupted. "If you could use magic," he cruelly pointed out, "you would not have let us drag you all the way to Vangelar." Election's sharp eyes glanced downward. Besides, he looked at her slender figure and continued coldly, "I have no interest in sharing a bed with a woman who can barely stand on her own 2 feet. Election bowed his head in parting. "I will return tomorrow to give you more time to reconsider." Refusing to let him leave, Elisabetta stopped him. "I do not need more time," she declared sincerely and firmly. "You are my only path." Elisabetta continued without the slightest hesitation, "I have made my offer. Now it is your decision." She frowned and stated clearly, "Whether you accept it or not." Election cast a thoughtful glance in her direction, then left in silence. Back at the palace, standing before the supreme ruler, Noir spoke. "So, Grand Duke Kiston." He lifted a brow and asked, "Did you really sleep with the princess?" Election let out a helpless sigh. "I never." A moment later, he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Election recalled the time when she had fallen ill and wondered, would that count as sleeping together? At once, Noir seized on the pause and gleefully pointed at him. "You did sleep with her." Hearing that, Election immediately tried to explain. "No, before he could finish, Noir sharply cut in. "You hesitated for 5 seconds. That means something happened, correct?" Election stiffly tried to clarify. "Please allow me," but Noir beamed with delight. "They told me the 2 of you were together the entire journey. I always thought you were just an unfeeling rock, but it seems I was wrong." Seeing His Majesty's suggestive words, Election turned and called out to Zabin, "What exactly did you tell His Majesty?" The young man anxiously turned his face away. "I only reported what I saw and heard." Reuben honestly testified that the 2 had been together almost constantly for the past month. "I only told the truth." Encouraged by that, Noir pressed further in indignation. "How dare you lie to your emperor? I also know that you frequently visited the princess in her prison chamber." Unable to contain his excitement, he continued grilling him. Was that concern for the woman carrying your child? Well, Election did not know how to answer, so he simply said, "If your majesty is already so certain, why summon me here in the first place?" Hearing that, Moore explained himself. "Already had my answer the moment you burst in, broke down the door, and dragged her away. However, I cannot treat such a serious matter lightly." He then announced an order. "I have summoned the imperial physician to examine her." Moore frowned as he added, "She will confirm whether or not the princess is truly pregnant." The king rested his chin on one hand and asked, "But answer me this, Election. How can you be sure the child is yours?" Election frowned in confusion and asked back, "What do you mean, your majesty?" The king answered casually, "The princess said that she was the one who seduced you." But how could a princess, someone who spent her entire life in the palace under her brother's protection, know how to seduce a man? Furthermore, there are rumors that the two of them were not merely brother and sister. Could it be that the late emperor had, at that moment, Election cut the king off, his eyes turning sharp. "Your majesty, you are insulting the princess of Agon." The king said coldly, "Insulting her? If the princess dares deceive me, then such an insult is not nearly enough. Not nearly enough." The king's tone grew harsher. "If she dares lie to me, she will certainly die a painful death. I will personally hand her over to Prince Hugo, and then the twins will die in exactly the same way." Lowering his face slightly, Election said, "Although I do not know what her life in Agon was like, from what I have seen, the princess is not the kind of person who would do something so vile." As he spoke, he remembered a fleeting moment that revealed her weakness. Given her physical condition, she likely would not have been capable of anything beyond ordinary conduct. The king spoke while reflecting. "In other words, the princess truly is carrying." Election answered with certainty, "The princess has never lain with any other man." After his audience with the king, Election left, walking on in deep thought. A woman who stood above countless others, so noble that she seemed the very embodiment of elegance, the woman I long for. Even if only once, every word she spoke and every gesture she made was impossible for him to forget. "Because I want to live. I do not want to die. There is something I must do, so no matter the cost, I must survive." Those desperate eyes, pleading with me, shook something deep in the bottom of my heart. After a long silence, Election asked one of his subordinates, "Where's the Princess of Agon right now?" The subordinate answered blankly, "Your Grace, she is likely with the imperial physician in the West Tower." At that, Election hurriedly turned and left, prompting the person behind him to ask in surprise, "Where are you going, Your Grace?" In the end, this must be what she wanted from me. As evening gradually fell, Elisabetta Asica lay curled up on her bed, slowly opening her eyes as she recalled the physician's words. "Your pulse is so weak that it is difficult to determine anything precisely. This may sound rude, but your pulse is like that of a dying patient." Elisabetta calmly answered, "That is simply because of my constitution. It does not prevent me from carrying out normal activities. So please continue the examination." The woman replied, "I will need to draw some of your blood, Your Highness. I believe that method will be more accurate." Elisabetta answered, "Go ahead." A little anxious, she clenched the mattress and thought, "By tomorrow they will know I lied." All I managed to do was by myself one more day. That night, as Elisabetta drifted to sleep, a large hand touched her forehead, startling her awake as she looked at the tall figure. "Why do you appear in my dreams when you have no intention of helping me?" She said, "You were right. Trying to survive when fate has already condemned me to die will only make everything worse. Once everyone finds out, I swear I will end my life, Sir Election." The next morning, as she slowly opened her eyes, a maid spoke in a cheerful tone. "Oh, you're awake." A little confused, Elisabetta sat up in surprise and asked, "Who are you?" The maid introduced herself warmly. "My name is Ibessa. Starting today, I will be your personal maid. If you need anything at all, please do not hesitate to tell me." At that moment, Elisabetta was quite surprised and thought to herself, a maid? Why would they assign a maid to someone about to die? Ibessa continued, "He ordered me to do whatever you ask." Startled, Elisabetta asked back, "Who?" The maid happily replied, "Who else? Of course, Grand Duke Kiston, Your Highness. Your fiancé." That answer left her utterly stunned. As for the Grand Duke, his hand was currently clenched tightly on his lap. At that moment, Election pulled back the curtain over the window so the light could enter the room. Turning his head slightly, he asked with concern, "How are you feeling?" You have been lying in bed for 3 whole days. Elisabetta looked up in slight surprise, then lowered her head again and replied, Yes, Ibessa already told me. I thought I had only fallen asleep for one night. I must have been utterly exhausted from all the strain. I feel better now. After a brief hesitation, she continued, But if I'm still alive, he suddenly spoke in a calm voice. But as you said, the emperor constantly pressuring me to produce an heir is rather troublesome. If this arrangement can free me from the emperor's endless complaints, then it seems I lose nothing. The princess listened intently to his words, and in the end, perhaps he truly was the solution to her problem. You are a descendant of the heroes who defeated the dragons, while I am the child of a dragon, one descended from dragonkind. Perhaps you can suppress my violent instincts. Elisabetta grew anxious again as she said, I am certain I can. Election continued calmly. I told the emperor that we truly did sleep together, and I also bribed the imperial physician who examined you. She will be in charge of checking your health from now on. She politely expressed her gratitude. First of all, thank you for accepting my absurd request. He answered, You need not thank me. We are simply making use of each other. This is nothing more than a contract marriage. He then asked, Can you endure about half a year? Hearing that, she fell into thought. Half a year? Because the emperor was determined to make Sir Election produce an heir, he would grow suspicious if she showed no signs of pregnancy. That also meant she had to successfully conceive this man's child within half a year. She replied, I will do my best to cooperate. Election turned away, pulled a sheet of paper from inside his coat, and said coldly, If things do not go according to plan, I will tell His Majesty the truth, and he will decide your fate. She silently watched him and thought to herself, that icy gaze and those harsh words. They are quite different from how he treated me over the past 2 months. But I brought this upon myself. She clenched her hands. I had already prepared myself to face this kind of coldness, Elisabetta thought. After signing the document, Election turned back and said, For the next 6 months, the House of Kiston, including myself and Reuben, will protect you. She seemed hesitant as she spoke. But Lord Kiston, this made him ask, Is there something you wish to say to me? She answered with a sorrowful look in her eyes. I know you must hate me, and I know it cannot be pleasant to share a bed with a woman for whom you feel nothing. But please promise me that you will not refuse me. He looked rather shocked upon hearing that. Election fell silent for a long moment, and his gaze gradually softened. I am glad that at least you understand that children do not simply fall from the sky. Hearing that, she suddenly felt embarrassed and blushed. She replied shyly, I am not that foolish. Even her ears turned red uncontrollably. Seeing that, he said, If this is something that worries you, then write down the obligations the two of us should have toward each other. She replied, Oh, may I? She stepped over to the table, pen in hand, and reviewed the contract. Should we write that we must sleep together at least 5 times within a certain period, following the physician's recommendation? If we do it 5 times a month, that would be 30 times in half a year. She thought nervously, would that be too little? She held up 2 fingers and asked, What about double that? Election had no idea how to respond. Elisabetta continued, raising 3 fingers. Triple? Helplessly, he rubbed his forehead and said, Princess, you only need to write as often as possible. I do not want to set a specific number and make it sound like a task to be completed. Hearing that, she flushed scarlet. All right, that works too. She signed it just like that and said it's done. From today until the first day of October, I have been granted 6 more months to live. And if I succeed in becoming pregnant, I will have 10 months. Suddenly, he murmured by her ear, You may run away at any time if you become afraid. She asked, At any time? He replied, Yes. If you're able to, then yes. I have more than enough time to plan a safe escape and return to Agen. From now on, I cannot afford to waste a single moment. She answered, I will not run away anymore. A few days later, at the wedding ceremony of Election and Elisabetta looked rather melancholy. She thought to herself, André would surely be heartbroken to see this. André had once said to her, Elisabetta, I will find the best man in the world for you to marry, someone who will treat you kindly and remain faithful to you. Elisabetta listened closely as he spoke. André painted a beautiful picture in his mind. You will wear the most splendid wedding dress, and there will be a wonderful ceremony with everyone's blessings. He continued, that wedding will be even grander than the emperor's. So promise me that you will always stay healthy, Elisabetta. Returning to the present, she stood with Election. The priest spoke, In the name of God, I accept the marriage vows between the two of you. At last, you may seal your vows with a kiss. Elisabetta looked up in surprise. But election remained perfectly calm. Affirm before God that your vows are true. Both of them fell silent. Elisabetta hesitantly looked at the man before her. Election gave a faint smile and glanced to the side. The Emperor of Vangelar was seated there, watching. Was this wedding truly necessary from the beginning? All she needed to do was bear him a child. Election had gone to see the Emperor. Why not simply take the child and marry a noble woman of suitable standing for the House of Kiston instead? Election lifted his gaze. Your Majesty, the Emperor said, do not look at me like that. It is not as though I bear the princess any ill will. She must have desperately tried to seduce you in order to survive. How foolish of you to fall for her. Those words forced Election to suppress his anger. In the chapel, his hand curled tightly into a fist. Fallen for her, he looked at Elisabetta standing before him. Perhaps I really once had. Elisabetta's hand came to rest against Election. She stepped closer and said, we only need to pretend. Whether it was instinct or a passing emotion, Election looked at Elisabetta. He held her by the waist. What I gain from this marriage? You ought to. Elisabetta looked at him. Election lifted her chin and lowered his face. Do this properly, princess. What I receive in return is forgiveness for what I have done to the princess of Agon. Their lips met, and so, even if it weighed on my mind a little, I had no. Elisabetta clutched Election's clothes tightly. The kiss ended. Everyone was stunned. Election glanced at the person beside him again. Elisabetta was now deeply embarrassed. I now declare you husband and wife. He drew her into his arms. Elisabetta looked up at him. So then, Election seemed to be in a better mood now. Our ceremony is over. The carriage set off. Election rode outside on horseback. Why is he insisting on leaving immediately after the wedding? Elisabetta said. He must have urgent matters to settle at the estate. A servant said, but still. Ibessa, indignant on Elisabetta's behalf, said, you look so beautiful in that wedding dress, your highness, yet he did not even take a proper look at you. I know he is often indifferent, but he could at least have looked once. But Elisabetta did not seem to mind much. I do not think I'm beautiful enough to make him stare for that long. Ibessa was startled. What? She went on. Did you notice that all the knights in the hall were staring at you? Ibessa continued. It was only because staring so openly at the Grand Duke's bride was improper. Elisabetta smiled and asked, really? She said gloomily. He hardly looked at me at all. Elisabetta touched her lips. She recalled that kiss. The two of them had kissed. Princess. The call snapped Elisabetta back to reality. Election came to the carriage window and held out his hand. He opened the door. I think Election said, you should come out and get some air for a while. Elisabetta asked, is something wrong? But Election did not answer. Sir Election? His hand touched her cheek. Election replied, the sun is not too harsh today. Elisabetta blinked in confusion. Yes. Election withdrew his hand. Your whole body may stiffen if you remain in the carriage too long. He continued, why not ride with me instead? The riders all looked toward Elisabetta, making her feel a little awkward. Perhaps I should stay quietly inside the carriage. I think I have made everyone uncomfortable. The hood of a cloak covered Elisabetta's face. Election had pulled it over her head. It would be best for you to keep your hood up. He cast a glance at the riders behind them, then patted her head. The sun may not be too harsh, but one never knows. Elisabetta spoke. Sir Election. She held out both hands to feel her way. I cannot see anything at all. Election replied, I will remain beside you, so leave it as it is. Beneath the clear blue sky, Elisabetta rode with Election. He said to her, staying in such a cramped space all the time is not good for your health. Elisabetta smiled and replied, is that so? She turned as she heard Election say, you have been sitting in the carriage for 2 whole days. If you want to come outside, you only need to tell me. If you remain silent, I will not know. Elisabetta looked away. It is not that I would not tell you. I truly have been fine. She explained back in Agon, I also spent most of my days confined to my room, so I became more accustomed to staying indoors. Election asked, why would the princess of Agon be confined in the palace for her entire life? Elisabetta denied it. I was not confined. She explained, if I stayed outside for too long, I would end up bedridden for a long time afterward. Elisabetta continued, but whenever my younger brother came to visit me, I would go for a walk in the garden with him. At the mention of her brother, her spirits lifted. Election listened closely as she spoke. Those days were truly special, so I remember always waking up excited. Elisabetta tightened her hold on the reins. Even though I would end up stuck in bed again afterwards still, Elisabetta suddenly paused. She turned her palm upward. Wait, why is my hand healed? I was dragged around for a month and a half, and I even spent 5 whole days in the prison cell. She pulled back her sleeve. The bruises on my wrists have really faded too. Election looked at her wrist. The bruises are still there. Elisabetta asked in surprise, "What do you mean? I have never seen bruises fade this quickly." She could hardly believe it. It has only been about 10 days. How is that possible? Thinking back, Andre had once said to her, "You will get better, Elisabetta." He had smiled brightly and said, "So keep believing in yourself." Elisabetta wondered, "I truly do feel much healthier," just as Andre said. "But how?" Election leaned down. "I wonder." Elisabetta looked up. "What is it?" But he only said, "Never mind." Election thought to himself, how was she able to endure all of that? I never imagined anyone could be this frail. She bruises just from wearing shackles, and it takes 10 days for them to heal. Did she really think she could endure spending the night with the child of a dragon with such a weak body? Elisabetta kept looking at him. Election suddenly halted his thoughts. "Do not think about it. There is no use in it." Election said, "I think we should stop and rest at the nearby village for a while." Elisabetta replied, "Oh, if you're tired, that sounds like a good idea." Reuben reacted as though he had heard something strange. "Tired? His Grace? Did I hear that correctly?" Elisabetta said, "You must be exhausted after riding for 2 days straight, mustn't you?" Election looked puzzled. "What?" Elisabetta seemed to notice something. She turned away. "Sir Election," Elisabetta said, "I do not think we should keep going. Stop the horse at once." Before them lay a dark forest. "Something nearby is about to attack us." Election yanked back on the reins and pointed toward the dark crimson mist ahead. "Something nearby is about to attack us." As soon as he finished speaking, a small hand lifted and pointed as well. "Here." Elisabetta, seated in his arms, observed carefully and directed him at the 12 o'clock direction. Suddenly, an arrow flew in from nowhere, passing right beside Elisabetta's hair. A fraction closer, and it would have pierced her face. She froze at the sight, her frightened eyes following the arrow. The bright red arrow struck the ground. Elisabetta stared at it for a moment and murmured, "An arrow." While still alarmed, she felt her body sway. In that instant, Election had already pulled the horse back and shouted, "We are under ambush. Everyone, defensive formation now." After setting Elisabetta down by the carriage, he said to Reuben, "Take the princess to the center." As Reuben ran over, he hurriedly answered, "Yes, sir." She looked toward Election with wide, anxious eyes, while Reuben urgently pressed her, "We must go quickly, princess." Suddenly Election turned back in surprise when a voice called out, "Wait." Elisabetta immediately caught hold of the edge of his clothes and told him, "Please be careful." Election's gaze shifted at once. He stared at the trembling hand clutching his clothes. A moment later, he strode forward and urged the young commander, "Move, Reuben." Reuben quickly replied, "Yes, sir." Elisabetta said nothing more. She only stood there silently, watching him with anxious eyes. Election walked away, his back towering like that of a hero. As Reuben hurried to lead the princess away, tens of thousands of arrows flew toward them. Several soldiers quickly rushed forward and used their swords to deflect the arrows, shouting, "Protect the center." Even so, he was still struggling badly. While blocking arrows for the princess with his sword, Reuben cursed angrily. Damn it. Suddenly, Elisabetta's eyes widened, as if she had seen something terrifying. As she carefully observed the arrows scattered across the ground, she thought, "These arrows." The maid helped the princess into the carriage, while Reuben shouted anxiously as he fought, "Please get inside, quickly." Before stepping into the carriage, Elisabetta hurriedly told Reuben what she had noticed. "Sir Reuben, those arrows have been coated with poison. If you were struck, you could lose your life." At her words, Reuben's trembling voice rang out. "Poisoned?" Elisabetta's eyes shifted slightly, and though not completely certain, she said, "If I remember correctly." Memories of death flashed through her mind, along with the vivid red of blood, and Elisabetta explained, "I saw arrows just like these when I escaped from Agon. These are Yugal's arrows." After saying that, she quickly sat back inside the carriage, while Reuben looked ahead and cursed furiously, "Those vicious bastards." Elisabetta's trembling hand pressed against her chest, and she thought in fear, "I'm definitely the one they're hunting. What can I do?" Then, in an instant, she remembered the past, when Andre had held her and warned her, "Listen carefully, Alice. The magic circles I created for you are simple defensive and offensive spells." As those memories resurfaced, Elisabetta engraved his words in her heart. "You only need to touch them and call my name." Immediately afterward, she made her decision. Elisabetta lifted her clothes and reached out to touch the magic circle. She lowered her head, wrapped her arms around herself, and prayed silently, "Please give me strength." A pale blue light enveloped Elisabetta, and she stretched her hand out before her and shouted, "Andre." Only a moment later, that blue radiance spread outward, covering the entire carriage, escorting Elisabetta. Those rays of light caught his eye, and Election quickly glanced over. When he saw the barrier circle spreading across the area, Election thought to himself, a defensive spell. "I see." Suddenly, someone beside him spoke in irritation. "I knew it." Giannic held a razor-sharp blade in his hand. As he advanced, he accused him, "You took that woman because you knew about it, didn't you?" Then he put on a smug expression. "Elisabetta Asica didn't tell you the truth, did she?" Election looked at him in silence, continuing to listen to his rambling. The truth of why the Emperor of Agon values his older sister more than his own life. Only after understanding Giannic's meaning did he finally speak in denial. "I don't know what you're talking about." Giannic seemed a little surprised. He gave a short laugh, then quickly asked again, "You don't know? Then does that mean you were truly deceived by that fox?" Seeing that he could not shake him, Giannic's attitude began to change. He pointed at Election's face and shouted, "Stop lying to yourself and hand over the princess's head." Election remained calm as he listened to the man continue boasting. "If you behave, I'll allow you to leave this place." In the end, he could not endure it any longer and ground his teeth as he asked, "You say her head? What use could her head possibly be?" Although Giannic's face had gone pale with fear, Election continued, "If I were you," claws emerged from his hand, and his voice became that of a true demon. "I wouldn't be stupid enough to challenge something that isn't even human while being this weak myself." Election's entire body began to change. In the darkness, his resentful voice rang out. "Although I don't know why you were so obsessed with obtaining her that you ambushed the Knights of Rotur, those disgusting, greedy eyes of yours." The moment he finished speaking, he rushed forward and seized the man by the throat, leaving Giannic unable to resist. Election's blue eyes flashed, as if his fury were blazing. He said, "They annoy me to death." A crow quickly flew across the sky. In that blood-red scene, Election's hand pierced through Giannic's body. Immediately afterward, the man's body crashed to the ground. Though his face was covered in blood, the corner of Giannic's mouth still curled upward smugly. Lying in a pool of blood, he looked toward the man, calmly walking away. "Be careful, Grand Duke." His eyes had turned white, and each word came out with his final breaths. "That fox will bring everything to an end. She'll devour you and vanish without a trace." Election remained pensive, silently listening to those broken words. Just like that cunning Emperor of Agon. A sudden cry from somewhere nearby made Election unable to pay Giannic any further attention. His eyes filled with panic as someone shouted, "The princess's carriage." The princess's carriage has fallen off the cliff. Before that, the carriage had been traveling safely along the road, surrounded by the sound of flowing water. A maid peered in through the door and reported to Elisabetta, "Your Highness, things seem to have calmed down now. It's much quieter outside. You must have been terribly frightened." Elisabetta was still looking down, lost in her own thoughts, paying no attention to what she said. She held out her trembling hand and thought, "In any case, my magic power seems to be nearly exhausted. I wonder if Sir Election is all right." As the carriage had stopped to rest, someone was quietly approaching. Because of something unforeseen, a hand suddenly shot up into the air. Ibessa threw herself toward Elisabetta and asked anxiously, "Your Highness, are you all right?" Seeing her cling to her, Elisabetta blankly called out, "Ibessa." Suddenly, Ibessa's whole body collapsed backward, powerless. As the carriage plunged down the cliff, one of the few survivors cried out in terror, "Your Highness." The general, observing the front, suddenly froze when someone called to him, "Reuben." Election moved closer and asked anxiously, "What happened?" Reuben quickly reported the carriage fell off the cliff. Looking at Giannic's body lying in a pool of blood, he silently concluded, "That bastard must have hidden somewhere and pushed the carriage down the cliff the moment the magical barrier disappeared." The princess pushed her maid out of the carriage and fell into the ravine alone. Reuben stared at the still surface of the water and proposed, "We need to go down on foot around the gorge to the lake below. I'll head down immediately. A few drops of blood still remained on Election's face as he stood in silence, lost in thought. Seeing that he said nothing, Reuben called uncertainly, "Your Grace?" Election's fist suddenly tightened, and he thought perhaps his shadow stretched long across the ground. Dark thoughts enveloped Election. Perhaps it would be better to simply let her go like this. He began imagining scenes drenched in blood. She would die in bed with a dragon in heat, die with her womb torn apart by a child, or be hanged after the truth was exposed. The fate awaiting Elizabetta would surely be miserable. If she was destined to die in such a tragic way, then perhaps simply falling into the lake would be better. Suddenly, a voice cut through his thoughts. "Your Grace, your orders?" Looking at the man who seemed not to hear and kept walking forward, the person behind him called anxiously, "Your Grace." His hand clenched once more, as if he had just made some great decision. Election gritted his teeth and rushed forward unwillingly. At that moment, beneath the lake, both the carriage and Elizabetta had completely sunk below the surface. She made no struggle at all and simply let herself sink. This must be the end of my life as ordained by God. Looking at the faint light filtering down through the water surface, she thought, if this is the ending meant for me, I should have died sooner. At least then I could have preserved my dignity as a princess of Agon. Suddenly, a voice echoed in her mind. "I had to die so that you could live, Ellis." In her memory, she asked in shock, "What?" As she anxiously chased after Andre and asked, "What are you saying, Andre?" He kept walking while gently advising her, "Never give up on yourself." He smiled faintly and continued, "You can do far greater things than I ever could, Ellis, so promise me that you will never give up on life the way you once did." As those memories surfaced, Elizabetta's body, which had nearly gone limp from drowning, immediately stirred awake. Her feet kicked against the dense water, and she thought, Her face showed clear unwillingness to surrender as she lifted her head toward the lake's surface and told herself, "I can't give up like this." Immediately afterward, the magic circle on her back began to glow. She reached toward the light on the water's surface as though searching for salvation. At the same time, a firm hand reached toward her, and her eyes flew open in shock. Election rushed to her and quickly pulled her into his arms. Above the forest, thick fog now blanketed everything. The two of them made it safely to shore, but Elizabetta's body could endure no more, and she lost consciousness. "I won't hesitate." He quickly bent down and gave her artificial respiration. A moment later, Elizabetta spat out water and began coughing violently. Her eyes opened hazily when she heard someone calling her anxiously, "Princess." It was Election calling to her in a panic as he asked worriedly, "Princess, are you all right?" Tears that Election could no longer hold back spilled down, his blue eyes deeper than the lake itself. Elizabetta studied his face and thought, "Come to think of it, this man always seems to waver whenever my life is prolonged." The corners of her eyes grew damp, and tears slipped down as well. She thought, "I only realized it after seeing it happen so many times." Looking at the tears streaming across the man's face, she softly called, "Sir Election." Elizabetta lifted her head and hesitantly spoke. "I." She gave him a faint smile, but there was not the slightest trace of joy in her voice. "I survived again." The two of them leaned against each other by the forest, and Elizabetta spoke again. "I survived yet another time. Some time earlier, in a vast castle, someone had said, I wouldn't be surprised if she passed away at any moment now." Shervin bowed his head and hesitantly said, "Forgive me for saying this, but I do not understand." Looking at the person who had survived countless brushes with death lying on the sickbed, he voiced his doubt. How is it that the princess can still remain alive? Elizabetta's small body trembled, her entire face flushed red with fever. A small hand held hers. She thought, "When I was little." Looking at the youthful face before her, Elizabetta's old thoughts resurfaced. "I was often jealous of my younger brother because he was always healthy." The two children sat by the bed and talked. Young Elizabetta said to her little brother, "You're so lucky, Andre, to always be so healthy. I want to become stronger too." The boy paused for a moment, then quickly asked her, "You must really hate being sick, don't you, Ellis?" Elizabetta sighed, puffed out her cheeks, and answered, "I hate it very much." She toyed with a lock of her hair that had turned white and continued, "Look at my hair. It's ugly, isn't it? Every time I fall ill, its color changes." She looked at her younger brother and told him, "The doctor said that the colder I become, the harder it will be to see any brown left in my hair." Andre gently lifted a strand of his sister's white hair and comforted her. But to me, it's very beautiful. Elisabetta's lashes drooped sadly, and after hearing his words, she thought to herself, Andre always tried his very best to comfort me. But every time I complained about my health, pain would appear in his eyes, and that always made my heart ache. As soft light filtered into the room, a voice sounded. I am fine, Andre. Elisabetta tilted her head and said, I'm not a child anymore. She looked at Andre, who was worrying beside her, and said, I'm already used to being sick. Tears still fell from his eyes, and she continued, I'm really fine. Elisabetta's thoughts continued to wander. So I stopped talking about how jealous I was of him, and I kept telling him again and again that I was fine. But that truly damaged my heart. Unable to express my frustration at the physical pain, my mind quickly collapsed. And eventually, when I found myself standing at death's door, I cursed myself. In the room, Elisabetta stared blankly at the person before her who had a hand resting on her medicine bottle. She lowered her head like a child who had done wrong as the person reminded her, when you cannot sleep, your highness should only take a small amount of this medicine. If you use too much, it could become poison to you. Elisabetta's sorrowful face was reflected in the glass bottle as she silently listened. In the dark space, the liquid from the glass vial spilled all over the floor. Exhausted, Elisabetta collapsed to her knees and heard someone shouting her name. Sister Ellis. Andre held his unconscious sister and kept blaming himself. It's all my fault. Because of me. You. Tears streamed down his face as he thought she had left him. Don't go, Ellis. Please don't leave me here alone. She drowsily opened her eyes when she heard her younger brother rambling. I still haven't done anything for you. As Andre held her in his arms, she silently asked him, But Andre, what use is there in living like this? Warm sunlight shone over the scattered shards of glass on the pages of a book. Andre knelt beside her and gently soothed her. I'm going to draw magic circles on your body. It may hurt a little, but please endure it. Elisabetta turned to look at him and asked curiously, what kind of magic is it? Andre did not answer and only smiled at her. He placed his hand on Elisabetta's bare back and gently explained, it is the kind of magic that will take away the things that make you ill. From that day on, Andre began drawing magic circles on my body. Attack, defense, self-destruction. Every time he drew a circle, he would tell me what it did. But he never once told me the purpose of the very first magic circle he drew on my body. I wonder what that first circle was meant to do. Back in the present, Election gently carried Elisabetta into the room. Wrapping her arms around his neck, Elisabetta asked in confusion, Are we really going to stay here for several days? I thought the schedule was very tight. Election set her down on the bed and explained, You fell into a lake from a cliff so high that not even the strongest knight could have survived it. Elisabetta replied stubbornly, Even so, I'm perfectly fine. Her eyes widened as she patiently told him, I really am fine. I didn't break any bones, and I don't feel pain anywhere. My brother's magic must have. Suddenly, she remembered something. Come to think of it, when I fell into the water, the magic circle on her back had lit up and left her body. Elisabetta placed a hand on her chest and thought, something left my body, and it felt as though I myself had used magic. Suddenly, both of them turned toward the voice outside the door. It was Reuben. Your Grace, the bath is ready. Shall I have it brought up here? Election tilted his head slightly toward him and said, Yes. Bring it up at once. Reuben quickly answered, As you command, Your Grace. And as for the punishment? Election's fierce face appeared beyond the door as he growled, Half a day until nightfall. Don't let a single one of them off easily. You included. Trembling, Reuben answered, Yes, sir. After hearing the conversation between the two men, Elisabetta felt puzzled. Why are the Knights of Rotier being punished? Election clenched his hand tightly, his voice devoid of emotion. Because they failed to carry out my orders properly, and in the end they fell without protecting their master. But afraid that she would worry, he added, They're only paying the price for their own incompetence, so you needn't concern yourself with it. She did not quite agree with him, but Election continued, There's something else. He began to explain, and then made her an offer. Ibessa injured her hand. It is not serious, but since you will not be able to use it for a while, I will serve as your attendant during that time. Those words sounded utterly unbelievable to Elisabetta, and she immediately asked, What? But if that happens, then will we have to sleep in the same room? Election explained calmly that there was nothing wrong with a husband and wife sleeping in the same room. But Elizabetta still hesitated. Lowering her head, she said, "But how can I let you become my servant? I need to bathe and I can take care of everything myself." Suddenly, Election raised a hand and cupped her face. He said gently, "Your body is freezing cold." As Election pulled her cloak down, he coaxed her softly. "You should take off these wet clothes first." Elizabetta immediately resisted. "I can do it myself." In her hazy gaze, he gently took her hand and said in a low voice, "I can see that you can barely move a finger right now." Election lightly lifted her hand, his tone tinged with a hint of pleading. "So please, don't push me away. Leaving you alone like this makes me worry." Elizabetta pulled her hand back and stared at the man before her, thinking to herself, even if I asked, he still wouldn't leave. Her hands clutched the hem of her dress tighter and tighter as she grew more tense. "Anyway, I'll have to go through this countless times in the future after agreeing to bear his child." Elizabetta looked up at her strong man and made up her mind. Then, "All right." Election stepped closer, took her hand, and said gently, "Here." He reached behind her and undid her belt. When the front of her robe fell open, Elizabetta's whole body flushed red. Election's gaze suddenly froze, then fixed intently on her body. Seeing that he had stopped moving, she lifted her head in confusion. The next moment, he draped a cloak over her, covering Elizabetta's pale body. Pressing her lips together, she looked at her man with hazy, puzzled eyes. Seeing the tightly pressed line of his mouth, she could not understand it. Was he angry about something? His eyes turned coldly away, yet his reddened cheeks stood in complete contrast. Warm sunlight streamed into the little room. Elizabetta sat in the bath, studying her hands as she thought, "Something definitely pushed me with great force." She recalled that the magic at her back had lit up then. When the light flashed, blood-stained memories resurfaced in her mind. It felt just like that time. Elizabetta drew up her knees and hugged herself, her eyes full of turmoil and confusion. "Something is definitely happening to my body. What on earth did you do to me, Andre?" Suddenly, a voice behind her made her jolt. "Princess." Election stood behind the door, still unable to stop worrying as he called into the room. "If you need any help, tell me at once." Elizabetta continued soaking in the water and remained silent. After a long while, she finally asked timidly, "Sir Election, are you angry with me?" Election turned back in surprise and asked in confusion, "What?" Resting her head on her knees, Elizabetta spoke in a faintly aggrieved voice that was hard to detect. "Well, your voice and your actions seem more distant." When he did not answer, she continued to guess on her own. "I understand. After all, in the end, this was all my fault." Warm sunlight poured in as Elizabetta's gentle voice continued. "Your men nearly died because the Crown Prince of Ugal took an interest in me, and our schedule was delayed." Tears rolled down one after another. She bit her lip in distress. "I only ever bring trouble to this man." "Elizabetta, you really are." At that moment, Election seemed to have thought things through and finally spoke. "I'm not angry with you." In a low voice, he asked, "Have you forgotten the agreement between us?" He repeated every line written clearly in black and white on those pages. "You promised to bear me an heir, and I promised to protect you. That is our agreement." After explaining, he placed the blame on himself instead. "In other words, this is entirely my fault. You are the one who should be angry with me, Princess." His hand clenched tightly as regret closed in around him. "I should never have left you in someone else's care." Recalling the mistake he had made then, Election thought to himself, "I truly made a fatal mistake when I gave in to that ridiculous provocation and left my position to join a duel." What provocation? It wasn't as though I had any grudge against Gienic Sihit of the Kingdom of Ugal. It was only that seeing him lust after the princess made me uncomfortable. I did not want him to humiliate her again. And yet, when I saw the carriage carrying her plunge into the ravine, I thought perhaps that would be better. He let out a sigh and continued blaming himself. "I'm such a hypocrite." Tears streamed down Elizabetta's face as she listened to his words. "This happened because I was distracted from what truly mattered. I promise I will never let something like this happen again." Water spilled over the edge of the bath and soaked the room. Elizabetta's voice answered him. "Then that means..." She opened the door, faced her man, and asked, "I am important to you, aren't I, Election?" The corner of his mouth tightened, as though he were weighing something. Then solemn words came from him. "You are the most precious and important person I have ever protected, princess." As soon as she heard those words, her whole face flushed hot. Election picked up the bath towel beside him and continued, "That has always been true." He draped the towel over Elisabetta's shoulders. Both his actions and his words were reassuring, and it will remain true for the next 6 months, in accordance with our agreement. Her hand lightly caught at Election's sleeve as she whispered, "Then please, do not turn your back on me." The moment he lowered his head, he saw the girl before him with eyes full of pleading. "You do not have to take the initiative with me, but please do not ignore it when I try to come close to you." He kept his lips tightly pressed together. Helplessly, Elisabetta said, "You know very well that you are the only person I can cling to." Remembering her agreement with Election, she thought to herself, "I have lost everything. The only thing I can rely on now is the fragile sheet of paper we hold between us. If the man who holds that agreement turns his back on me, then perhaps I would have died at the bottom of the lake today. There is nowhere safe for me anymore. Nowhere at all. Any place other than beside this man would be the bottom of a lake, a cliffside, or a bed of sharp thorns." Her feet moved cautiously toward him, and she spoke again. "Please don't let anyone else protect me in your place." Tears once again ran down Elisabetta's face as she pleaded softly, "Promise me, Election." He pressed his lips together and listened in silence to everything she confessed. Then Election took her hand and replied, "All right." He embraced Elisabetta as if to comfort her. "I promise, princess." Night fell, and moonlight filled the room. While Elisabetta slept deeply, Election sat silently reading beside her. His eyes flickered with surprise when he heard her voice. Elisabetta's face was flushed red as she trembled and murmured, "It's so cold." He gently placed a hand on her forehead to check her temperature. He frowned slightly at the temperature of her skin. "No matter how much I warm her." Election looked at the sleeping girl before him and felt more and more troubled. Her body turns cold again immediately. Suddenly, he carefully drew Elisabetta into his arms. She drowsily opened her eyes when she felt the change. Elisabetta braced a hand against his chest and called out in surprise, "Sir Election." Election lowered his eyes slightly and quickly explained, "You were shivering." Elisabetta's face was red from the cold, and she asked in surprise. Feeling the warmth of his hand on her shoulder, she whispered, "Thank you." Elisabetta rested her head against Election's broad chest and thought, "I feel warmer now." But below that, her feet curled up from embarrassment. But this moonlight flooded the room, clearly illuminating the two of them wrapped around each other. Elisabetta softly asked him, "Sir Election, isn't this position a little?" Election held her squirming body and reminded her gently, "Stay still." In an instant, the blush spread even further across her face. Elisabetta still shifted atop his body and said with discomfort, "It's a little difficult." As if she had bumped into something, her whole body suddenly froze. Election understood at once and hurriedly told her, "You can just ignore it." Elisabetta's voice trembled badly when she answered him. "But it's two." Suddenly, his hand came to her back and slowly pressed her down, or rather, feeling the thing clearly beneath her, Elisabetta let out an uncomfortable cry. Election's low voice sounded beside her ear. "You can take this chance to get used to it." He lightly kissed her neck and coaxed her in a seductive voice. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? If I remember correctly, you were the one who begged me for..." Elisabetta's voice came out alluring and shaky. "That." Election's restless hand continued up her thigh as he went on. "Wasn't this what you meant?" Sitting on his lap, she pleaded softly, "I'm a little uncomfortable." Election could only remind her helplessly, "If you keep moving like that, something will happen. Stay still." He lifted his eyes to look at his girl and thought, "If I reach for her carelessly." Elisabetta's face before him was like the bright moon. Election thought to himself, "I might ruin her. We cannot be like this. The most beautiful thing I have ever held. If there's one thing, one instinct in me that never changes, it is the desire for glittering things like a crow." 1 week later, sunlight poured across the forest road as the carriage procession set out again. Ibessa eagerly watched the scenery outside and said to Elisabetta, "Look outside, princess." Light fell across Elisabetta's dazed face as Ibessa continued. "At last, this journey is almost over." Suddenly, her dreamy eyes paused when she heard Ibessus say, "We're close to Rotir now, bordered by the rugged Granton Mountains and forests to the north, and by a fertile plain stretching along the Tin River to the south. It remained warm even in winter despite its northern location. That made it as valuable as any land in the south." A smile still lingered on Elisabetta's lips as she thought, "I've arrived at the place where I will hide for the next 6 months. Rotir, the blessed land of Vangeler." As soon as they arrived, all the household servants were already standing at the entrance to welcome them. "Welcome back, Your Grace." The moment he dismounted, Election asked, "Is there anything to report?" The butler, Alfred Jong, answered at once, "Nothing out of the ordinary besides the matters I already wrote in my letters." After him, Election's aide, Savitt, also spoke up. "We have quite a number of budget items waiting for your approval, sir." Then a woman stepped forward as well. "My lord." Pattinson bowed. "I am glad to see you have returned safely." Election seemed slightly surprised, so he asked, "Has anything unusual happened?" A seasoned gleam flashed behind Pattinson's glasses as she explained, "You are the one to whom something unusual has happened, Your Grace. Sir Reuben sent word to us about what occurred." Standing before the Grand Duke without the slightest fear, she said bluntly, "Our castle has finally gained a lady of the house." The people around them broke into a cold sweat as they thought, Lady Pattinson always goes straight to the point. At that moment, a pair of feet was making its way toward them step by step. Elisabetta stepped down from the carriage with Reuben's assistance, gentle sunlight falling over her. When they saw Election go forward to receive her, the people around them exclaimed, "So it's true after all. I can't believe he got married without saying a word." Remembering the unfinished work waiting for him, Alfred said sorrowfully, "Judging by the amount of paperwork waiting for him, he truly should not be wasting time." At that moment, Pattinson spoke again. His fiancée went to quite extraordinary lengths just to marry the master. Her expression darkened. "I would very much like to know what kind of woman she is." Election, Elisabetta, and several others were speaking in the great hall. He smiled. "The introductions should be finished now, so let me show you around the castle." As he spoke, Election held out his hand to her. "Let's go." Elisabetta hesitated briefly, then gently refused. "No, Your Grace, you should return to your work." He paused slightly. "What?" She looked at him anxiously. "Your schedule was delayed because of me, and I'm sure your work has piled up terribly, so you don't need to worry about me." Election cast a glance at the enormous castle before them. "This castle is like a maze. You might get lost." Elisabetta only smiled softly. "In that case, I'll ask General Reuben to guide me, and Ibessa is here too." He immediately objected. "Reuben failed to protect you, Princess." Reuben, standing behind them, could only lower his head in shame. She went on, "But this is your castle. It should be safe, shouldn't it?" Election answered sternly, "It is, but the others know nothing about you. I do not want the person accompanying you to know nothing about you." Elisabetta refused to yield. "They'll learn. You can't stay by my side every moment." He asked at once, "Why not?" She explained softly, "I don't want to force you to stay with me over something so small." Election refuted her at once. "This is not something small." Standing to one side, Alfred, Savitt, and Pattinson watched in silence. "He is always this stubborn, but it seems our new lady is not much different." Elisabetta lightly placed a hand on her chest. "There are things I can handle on my own. This makes me feel like a burden, and that is unpleasant for me." Election frowned slightly. "You are not a burden. This is my duty." She looked at him. "If you insist so strongly." Turning to his servants, Elisabetta said, "Then I will ask the butler and the head maid to accompany me." Alfred stepped forward and placed a hand over his chest. "I will guide you, Princess." Pattinson beside him seemed somewhat displeased. Elisabetta gave a slight nod. "Then I'll rely on you." She added, "May I see the main tower and then return to my room?" Alfred answered, "Certainly, Your Highness." Election merely stood there in silence, watching the two of them talk, unable to get a word in. Alfred continued, "I will also introduce you to the maids assigned to serve you." Savitt leaned close to Election. "Your Grace, you should rest as well and return to your study. Alfred and Lady Pattinson will take care of the princess." He answered briefly, "Wrong." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Savitt staring blankly. "Pardon." Election tilted his head and looked back. "You should call her Princess," he added, his gaze deep and unreadable. "She will not bear the title of Grand Duchess for long." In the dim corridor, Alfred's voice rang out. These stairs are very steep, Your Highness, so please be careful. He walked ahead, leading the way. This place was frequently invaded by neighboring countries, so the bedrooms were always placed at the top of the tower for safety. Then he continued, the Grand Duke spends most of his time in the study, so? Elisabetta fell briefly into thought. I understand. Looking out at the peaceful, picturesque view, she thought, so this is why this land is called blessed. This is the perfect refuge. There are no hanging executions here, nor the harsh northern winters. But her gaze gradually grew anxious, and I could not let down my guard. All through my childhood, I had always imagined how beautiful the world beyond would be. Yet that childhood had been destroyed along with the walls of the Agan Empire. A fleeting sadness crossed her face, but I could not tell for certain. She looked around the stairway corridor. Would this place become her refuge, or simply another battlefield? Election quietly approached from behind, but she was still lost in thought. Suddenly, Elisabetta noticed him. You came back. He stepped closer, one pace at a time. Yes, I was worried about you. Then, without warning, he bent down and lifted her into his arms, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It's already been an hour. At her startled expression, Election continued. This time, please don't refuse my help. Just accept it obediently. His eyes were sincere. You set yourself. I'll be very busy today. But if you fall ill again, that warm voice made her cheeks flush. Then I won't be able to focus on my work. Elisabetta gently rested against his shoulder. Then this time, I won't refuse your help again. He carried her onward. You must be tired. She smiled. As you can see, I climbed for a whole hour. You'd be tired too if you spent that long climbing these stairs. He laughed. I've never taken an entire hour to climb a staircase. Then his gaze softened slightly, though perhaps I should try that someday. His words made her face grow even redder. In the luxurious room, a voice sounded. It seems His Grace went straight to the study. Ibessa stood beside Elisabetta. The other servants said, he has a great deal to handle today. He must be tired. Shall I have them prepare bathwater for you, Your Highness? A knock sounded at the door. Your Highness, I am the head maid, Rebecca Pattinson. Elisabetta replied. Come in. The door slowly opened. Elisabetta glanced that way, with faint unease. Outside, Pattinson stood waiting with several other servants. I have brought those who will attend to Your Highness. I have trained them thoroughly, so you will have no trouble with them. Looking at them, she said, I don't need that many people. Ibessa and one more maid will be enough. Pattinson placed a hand on her chin. You will need more than two. Then she continued, after all, you are pregnant. Those words made both Elisabetta and Ibessa freeze. Pattinson smiled. This is a joyful blessing for Roteur, but to be honest, I could not help feeling worried when I heard the news. Elisabetta listened intently as she went on. But you know as well that the Grand Duke is no ordinary man, and you must be exhausted after such a long journey here. As Pattinson spoke, she signaled for a physician to enter. I thought it best to examine your health, so I brought the castle physician. The room suddenly fell silent, with only Pattinson's steady voice filling it. The physician who traveled with you from Vangeler will need time to settle in here, so I brought the castle physician to examine you immediately. Pattinson informed Elisabetta, the doctor you summoned from Vangeler will take quite some time to arrive here, so I invited our physician to examine you first, Your Highness. Elisabetta lifted her eyes toward them, unease rising in her chest. A physician from Rotier Castle? Elisabetta guessed silently that the man likely did not know she was not truly pregnant. She understood Election well enough. He was cautious, and he would never reveal such a secret to others. Which meant, at that thought, a grave suspicion arose in her mind. Pattinson had called the physician on her own. Elisabetta's whole body stiffened as she faced that reality. Is she suspicious? She must want to see whether my pregnancy is real. So she tried to refuse. Right now, I want to arrange my belongings. Let only Ibessa stay. Elisabetta stated her position clearly, and I only want to be examined by the personal physician I summoned. The physician you two speak of likely cannot help me right now. Pattinson still tried to persuade her. It will not take much time. Please regard this as the concern Shervan shows for its new mistress. Elisabetta was abruptly cornered and did not know how to answer for a moment. She seemed forced to accept the truth. This was not the Agan Empire, the place where she had spent her whole life. In other words, no one here was willing to indulge her wishes. Elisabetta had no choice but to agree. Then do it quickly. The physician immediately stepped forward to take her pulse. He soon grew flustered. Her pulse is very faint, so it is difficult to determine her present condition. To make a more accurate diagnosis, I need to draw her blood. Pattinson answered in Elisabetta's stead at once. Very well, then do it. But before she could finish, Ibessa lost her composure. This is outrageous, Lady Pattinson. She insisted on standing up for her mistress. How can you stab her with a needle when she hasn't even had time to rest after such a long journey? Ibessa kept arguing, but it did not seem enough to turn the situation around. This was strange. Blood test results could not possibly come back that quickly. Indignant, she stepped forward and shoved the physician aside. Move. This can wait a few more hours. Elisabetta watched them without any intention of stopping her. She stood and said to Pattinson, "It is no surprise that you do not know about my condition. Many physicians have failed from the very beginning, except for the physician appointed to me by yours truly and by your master. That is why I insist on waiting for her to arrive, even if I know this is all rather pointless." Elisabetta swiftly put Pattinson back in her place. But perhaps this is how servants attend their masters in Rotua. Pattinson immediately understood and bowed her head in apology. "Forgive my rudeness. I acted against your wishes because I was too worried." Elisabetta reminded her coldly. "It would be best to leave only one servant here. Dismiss the others. I did not like being attended by so many servants at once." Ibessa guessed. Perhaps they were not prepared to receive you properly. She stood beside Elisabetta's bed as they spoke. "You should tell the Grand Duke about this at once." Elisabetta lowered her eyes, weighed down by thought. No one here seemed likely to help her. She could not help feeling regretful. Clearly, not a single person was on her side, and Pattinson seemed to have considerable experience. Elisabetta's restless hands could not stay still. If that woman discovered that I am not pregnant, she would surely report it to the Emperor at once. I need to find someone on my side if I am to stay safe. She cast a slight glance beside her. Someone on my side. Then, to Ibessa's bewilderment, Elisabetta called out. Step by step, she reminded her of the debt between them. "When the carriage fell off the cliff, I pushed you away to save your life, did I not?" Ibessa answered fervently. "Of course, your highness. How could I ever forget that debt? If not for you, I might have suffered far worse than just an injury to my arm." Elisabetta's voice gradually deepened. If that is so, she quickly made her proposal. "What would you think of serving me in order to repay that debt?" The suggestion clearly surprised Ibessa. Elisabetta immediately explained, "You are my maid, but at the same time, you are also one of the Grand Duke's people. I am not asking you to betray him. What I need is for you to ensure my safety while I live here." She clenched the blanket tightly, her heart full of guilt. "I cannot deceive someone who has served me so faithfully every day." And Ibessa was the only person she had right now. So once again, Elisabetta called her name. Then she confessed frankly, "The truth is, I am not carrying any child at all." Ibessa could not hide the shock in her eyes. Suddenly, a noise at the door interrupted their conversation. An imperial physician entered, and Elisabetta said, "There, the person who can prove it has just arrived." Election sat in the study, reading documents while listening to the imperial physician speak about Elisabetta's condition. As long as she eats on time and gets enough sleep, the princess should be able to move about without any problem. The physician added, "She has also shown no side effect from the accident, so I do not think you need to worry too much." Election asked sternly, "Did you tell her what I instructed you to?" The imperial physician answered gently, "Yes, I did. I told her everything I know about the matter." Election, curious, asked, "How did she react?" The physician lowered her head slightly, sweat gradually appearing on her face as she hesitated to speak. Well, the evening glow had nearly covered the landscape. A few hours after that conversation ended, Ibessa cried out in alarm. "The child eats its mother?" The imperial physician answered calmly, "Yes. A dragon fetus will begin to grow feral once it develops enough and starts resembling a human being. The Grand Duke is an exception, but most children of dragons are born in beast form, and the fetus is the same. When the beastly side outweighs the human side, disaster befalls the mother. Even if the mother can control the fetus throughout 10 months of pregnancy, the fetus will drain all of the mother's nutrients and leave her too weak to give birth. After that, the child will come out by tearing through the womb." Ibessa turned deathly pale and covered her mouth. Elisabetta, meanwhile, remained silent, her face filled with sorrow as understanding dawned on her. So that is what he meant. Her mind recalled his words. What you're saying means you want to die in the most miserable way possible. She walked over to the imperial physician and asked softly, "Is there anything I must be careful of when sharing a bed with him?" The physician looked momentarily surprised, then made a small sound of acknowledgement. "There's a certain period you must avoid at all costs. It is when the dragon Samizada's fury toward humanity reaches its peak. During that time, they tend to kill or violate humans without hesitation. This is likely why the Grand Duke so often has to go to war. That maddened instinct will not disappear until he sees blood or satisfies his sexual desire. And another thing, those born with dragon blood like his are, by nature, weak against their own desires. They're known to endure for a very long time during intercourse." Ibessa immediately objected. "That can't be true. How could you survive that if it's basically the same as dying?" "Princess, please reconsider." Elisabetta seemed to let those words pass by unheard. "More importantly, that doesn't mean it's impossible, does it?" She cautiously explained what she meant. "What I mean is, are we physically incompatible?" The more she spoke, the redder she grew, with all the instinctive embarrassment of a young woman. "I was only wondering whether he would suit me." After hearing the story retold, Election gave a faint laugh. How bold! His gaze lowered, and doubt rose in his heart. Or is she so confident because she already has someone to rely on? The imperial physician suddenly spoke with a hint of entreaty. "By the way, Grand Duke, please take this as the concern of an old woman. The princess may be recovering rather quickly, but that does not mean she is as healthy as an ordinary woman." Worry showed plainly on her face as she warned him. "So when you lie with her, you must be very careful, and if possible, please treat her gently." The princess not only knows very little about sexual relations, she also seems unfamiliar with climax or pleasure itself. Election looked at the imperial physician and asked helplessly, "Are you telling me not to be rough with her?" Flustered, she replied, "Forgive this impertinence, your grace." A trace of weariness was plain on his face. "I wish I knew nothing about it." He thought that then everything would be far less difficult. At last, Election dismissed her. "You may go now." The imperial physician bowed. "Yes." He tapped his fingers against the desk and thought to himself, "For now, I should probably keep my distance." Suddenly, a voice rang out. "Grand Duke." Pattinson stepped inside and said politely, "Could you spare a little time for this old woman?" Election had a cup of hot tea prepared for Pattinson. He spoke first. "I believe I told you to treat her as you would treat me. Yet I know you summoned a physician from Rotier Castle without permission." Pattinson immediately bowed her head and admitted fault. "It was my mistake. I hope you will forgive me." Election lifted his teacup, his expression troubled. "How am I supposed to face her now?" Pattinson raised her eyes to him. "Grand Duke, may I say this, not as a servant, but as your nurse?" Election stopped mid-motion and asked, "What is it?" Pattinson hesitated for a moment before saying, "I hope that you will marry someone you truly love." I still remember that 9-year-old boy who first arrived at Vangelar Palace. His eyes were empty, yet they still shone brightly, full of admiration as he looked upon the imperial family here, especially His Majesty. Pattinson fixed her gaze on Election. "Are you aware of it, Grand Duke? That is how you looked at the princess. You looked at her exactly the same way you once looked at His Majesty, did you not?" Pattinson waited calmly for his answer. "Please tell me, Grand Duke, did you truly bring her here to be your partner? Or did you bring her here so she would submit to you and admire you as her master?" Election folded his arms across his chest, aloof and emotionless, and asked in return, "What if it is neither?" Pattinson maintained her calm demeanor. "I heard that the princess was nearly executed in the capital, and that her life was spared only because she claimed to be pregnant." Her gaze grew more severe. "You may deceive His Majesty, but you cannot deceive me. What is the real reason you brought the princess to Rotier? If it is not admiration, desire, or pity, then what is it?" Election answered only coldly, "Because I wanted to." Pattinson heard this as his brow tightened. His face remained utterly unmoved. "I brought her here simply because I wanted to. Is that answer sufficient?" Election had no more patience for the conversation and stood, drawing a clear line. "You may be my nurse, but if you continue questioning me, you will be overstepping your bounds." Pattinson glanced aside, avoiding that blade-sharp gaze, unable to say another word. As she watched his retreating back, she thought to herself, "Grand Duke, you have always been drawn to people who bear the image of God. But I know it is not because you have fallen for them, or because you find them beautiful or because you admire them. It is merely the result of the self-loathing etched deep into your heart since childhood. Before leaving, Pattinson still added one more thing. Grand Duke, please sleep in your room. Your wife is waiting. Election gave no response, focusing only on the documents before him. At the same time, Elisabetta lay asleep in her room, soft sounds slipping from her lips. Her fists were clenched, her brows furrowed as though she were caught in a nightmare. In the dream, her eyes trembled with tears when she heard a voice call out, "Alice." Seeing her twin younger brother appear before her with one eye bandaged, she gasped in alarm. "Andre, your eye." He paid no attention to that question and only asked, "Are you all right? What happened?" Hearing his reproachful words, Elisabetta stared blankly for a moment. "How could you do something so ridiculous, sister?" Andre looked at her with a pained, sorrowful expression. "You are the Princess of Agon. How could you even think of bearing Grand Duke Kistan's child?" Elisabetta lowered her eyes slightly as tears spilled over. "I have no other choice. I have to survive, and—" Andre cut her off at once and made a suggestion. "Then leave Rotier immediately, sister." A shaft of light fell across his face as his farewell reached her. "I'll come when I can." Elisabetta hurriedly stretched out her hand to stop him. "Andre." But then she abruptly woke from the dream. Elisabetta sat up and looked around at her surroundings before realizing it had only been a dream. She began to reflect. She had never once dreamed of him during the journey to Rotier. She glanced to the empty space beside her, and her face grew even gloomier. Her voice carried regret and loneliness. Sir Election still hasn't come tonight, either. By her reckoning, she had already been in Rotier for a week. Including the journey here, it had been nearly a month since they signed the contract. The memories of the days before surfaced again in her mind. Election had once said, "I promise you, princess." The more she remembered, the less Elisabetta could control herself, gripping the blanket tightly in her hands. He had never intended to keep that promise. Her eyes brimmed with utter disappointment, with a pain she did not even know how to put into words. A little later, as dawn slowly broke, a cry rang out inside the manor. "Princess!" Seeing Elisabetta still in her thin night clothes, the maid pleaded, "It's still early. Please put on something warmer." The footsteps of someone approaching drew both their gazes. It was Pattinson, respectfully greeting Elisabetta with two maids beside her. "Did you sleep well?" Elisabetta answered, though she still looked lifeless. "I slept well enough, thanks to you." Pattinson turned to the maid beside her and ordered, "Bring the princess a shawl at once." The maid quickly replied, "Yes, ma'am." Pattinson looked up at Elisabetta and said, "Please wait just a moment, princess." The moment Elisabetta saw the maid's face, she paused. Somehow, she realized that Rotier seemed to have a great many beautiful young women. Pattinson continued her attentive inquiries. "Is there anything else you need?" Elisabetta suddenly asked something unrelated. "Did you personally choose the maids in Rotier?" Though a little confused, Pattinson still answered thoroughly. "Up to now, the head butler and I have selected the servants together. If you wish to see a list of their names, I can provide you with one." She glanced to the side and grew awkward. Aside from that, some were sent personally by His Majesty." Elisabetta looked rather startled and asked again, "His Majesty sent maids?" Pattinson answered carefully, "To be precise, His Majesty sent marriage candidates, not maids." The moment those words left her mouth, Elisabetta was, as expected, stunned. Earlier, after feeling somewhat unwell and stepping out, Ellis had happened to run into the head maid there as well. When she found it strange and asked about it, she was told that some of the women here were considered marriage candidates. Upon hearing such shocking news, the Princess of Agon could barely accept it and had to brace herself against the wall as she descended the stairs. At that moment, sorrow was written plainly across Ellis's face. Her eyes were full of sadness, and still shaken by what she had just heard, she lowered her head slightly. One hand pressed against the brick wall, and in her mind that devastating sentence kept repeating, "His Majesty sent marriage candidates, not maids." With every step she took down the stairs, a single thought echoed in Elisabetta's head. His Majesty is taking a special interest in the Grand Duke's marriage. A heavy dejection enveloped her, along with quiet fear and brooding in her eyes. Even her hair looked a little disheveled. Most painful of all was that Pattinson had known she could not hide it, so she had explained it clearly. They were noble ladies personally sent by His Majesty, and they could not be turned away, so they had been accepted into the household as maids instead. A fragile girl like Ellis immediately started overthinking. She had heard that dragons were easily tempted by desire, so among those women who had been sent here, her imagination spiraled to the very peak of suspicion. Had he already slept with them? At that moment, the scene shifted back to Election. As if he had learned something, he frowned slightly and asked anxiously for confirmation. The princess went to the study alone. When questioned by Election, Ellis's close maid became nervous and only dared bow her head as she answered. She insisted on going alone, Your Grace. The princess was so determined that we did not dare follow. Please forgive us. Hearing that, he did not scold her. Instead, he let out a light, understanding sigh and asked about Elisabetta's condition. Has the princess been uncomfortable in any way lately? At that, Ibessa's eyes widened. Her great worry about Ellis finally slipped out. Well, it seems she has trouble sleeping, and she has nightmares quite often too. Election had not noticed it at all, so when he heard this, he was visibly startled, rubbing his chin in astonishment. That's strange. She was never like that on the way to Rotir, and Ibessa had not finished yet. Looking up at him, she revealed more. Also, it seems she feels uneasy sleeping alone. That left Election utterly shocked, his gaze dull with disbelief. Sensing something off about the captain of the knights, Ibessa added a reason for Ellis's symptoms. During the journey, Your Grace was always by her side. After all, when he thought back on it, Election realized it was true. He had practically stayed at her side day and night. From that, Ibessa formed her own hypothesis. The princess has only been in Rotir for a week. She probably just needs time to adjust. That was not all. Hoping the two of them might grow closer, Ibessa cleverly offered Election a suggestion. Could it be that she needs the warmth of her husband? At first, he looked rather doubtful, unable to believe what she was saying. But Ibessa, sharp as ever, hugged the feather duster to her chest and insisted, No, really. I'm always at her side attending to her, so I can tell. Then Ibessa softly pressed further. Why don't you go down to the study right now? The princess went looking for you and got lost, so she must be flustered. At that advice, he said nothing at first, his distant gaze full of troubled thought. He could not delay any longer. At last, Election accepted the advice and replied, All right, I understand. Ibessa immediately moved to lead the way with enthusiasm. Yes, then this way, please. But while she was eagerly acting as a first-time guide, Election suddenly stopped and asked, sensing something wrong, What way? Ibessa grew a little uneasy, slowly turning her head as she answered, Well, the door that leads to the staircase going straight from your bedroom to the study. The princess came down that staircase. Ibessa did not realize how terrifying that was. Only Election understood, and he became so alarmed that the veins in his neck stood out as he ground out. That dangerous staircase. Sensing something was very wrong, he asked again, his voice extremely tense. The princess came down there by herself? Something truly was the matter. The way he asked and the look on his face were enough to make Ibessa go pale with fright. But fortunately, Ellis was already outside now, among rows of green trees, by the royal stables under the blue sky. Her voice rang out, Thank you so much, Sir Reuben. Elisabetta was deeply grateful. Looking at him earnestly, she said, If it weren't for you, I would have been trapped on that staircase. Receiving such thanks, Reuben scratched the back of his neck a little awkwardly and replied, That area hasn't been used in a long time, so His Grace locked the entrance to the study. Recounting what had happened, he added, Still, I never expected you to slam into the door like that. That made the general gape in surprise, while Ellis, embarrassed, blushed and defended herself. I only knocked lightly. It's all right. Reuben had only been teasing, but he was still worried as he cautioned Ellis. That staircase is rather dangerous. It would be better if you didn't use it alone from now on. If you were hurt, the Grand Duke would worry as well. Ellis's face clouded over with sorrow and despair, as if she might cry at any moment. Feeling miserable and crestfallen, she could only lower her head and voice her thoughts. Worry? I'm not so sure. He's rather cold toward me. Hearing his lord described that way, Reuben found it absurd and widened his eyes as if he might jump in protest, hurrying to defend election. Cold toward you, princess. His grace is incredibly gentle and kind with you. Ellis looked a little taken aback. To make his words sound more convincing, Reuben, almost pale with anxiety, spoke from personal experience. You probably haven't seen how his grace treats the knights. Honestly, with dragon blood in him, he's terrifying enough to make your hair stand on end. One glance from him feels like he'll devour you alive. If you cross him, you're done for. Compared to how he treated them, Election's affection was obvious. Throwing up both hands, Reuben exclaimed, compared to that, he's soft as a ripe peach with you. Soft. But Ellis was still overthinking, and her thoughts immediately turned in a darker direction. Maybe the peach pit had already dried out. While she was speaking with the general, something behind her suddenly made her turn and let out a small sound of surprise. It was Election's warhorse, his steadfast companion through countless battles. The sight of it brightened her face at once. Oh, there you are again. Ellis quickly reached out and gently stroked its chin. Watching this from beside her, Reuben was startled out of his mind and hurried to stop her. Princess, that horse is dangerous if you touch it. But the horse showed none of its usual roughness or irritation, leaving Reuben utterly shocked and frozen as Ellis greeted it fondly. Hello there. Have you been well? She was so comfortable with it that she even rubbed her cheek against its muzzle. Part of the tension in her eyes seemed to ease as she said brightly, You're so big, yet so gentle. Even when a stranger rode you, you behaved so well. What is this one called? The question was asked, but Reuben still looked very uneasy, his eyes tense with fear that the princess might get hurt. His grace hasn't given it a proper name yet. Oh dear. Learning that Election had other women who might marry him, and now hearing that he had not even named the horse, she grew gloomy again and remarked, Your master really is heartless, isn't he? The warhorse snorted as if laughing. After watching for a while and seeing that it was entirely safe, General Reuben could only marvel in confusion. How strange. It's usually a violent, stubborn horse, and only the Grand Duke can handle it. Ellis merely let out a small, really? Then she continued talking to the horse and muttered, When is your master going to show himself? I was planning to go find him, but unfortunately, understanding her feelings somewhat, Reuben took the initiative to suggest, If you're feeling bored, would you like to take a short ride around the territory? Ellis seemed a little interested and agreed. If I can borrow a horse, that would be enough. I only want to stroll around the backgrounds. Quite casually, he told her, You may choose whichever horse you like. That suited her perfectly, and Ellis's first choice was this one. She turned to it and asked, Will you come with me? It answered with a cheerful neigh. But before anything more could happen, a figure appeared from behind and stopped her. No, you are pregnant. Riding alone would be very dangerous. Ellis shifted slightly and looked back. A hand moved gently toward her shoulder as he said, Don't even stand this close. It was Election himself. In a warm voice, he cautioned the woman he loved, It's dangerous to be near a warhorse like this. Then he wrapped an arm around Ellis's shoulders. Elisabetta turned to him and said, This world is full of dangerous things, isn't it? She timidly tugged at her clothing. Seeing the gesture, Election reached up and pulled off his own cloak. He draped it over her gently and said, That is only true when it comes to you. Looking her up and down, he asked, Have you been walking around dressed like this the whole time? Alice awkwardly explained, I hardly meet anyone in the castle. Besides, on the way here, I wore simpler clothes than this in front of the other knights. Election cut her off, making her jump. Princess. In a commanding tone, he said, You may only dress like this in front of me. Then he added, Or in front of the maids helping you prepare for bed. Alice fell silent for a moment at his words. Then she argued back, What does that have to do with anything? Even if I dress like this, you don't come see me anyway. Aggrieved, she said, You're busy all day and never bother coming near me. He spoke up. Then, Election asked, Is this how you mean to go on? She answered casually, If I don't say it, no one will know this is sleepwear. Reuben, standing beside them and listening to their conversation, could only scream inwardly. Election gently touched her lips and said, Stop biting them. You'll hurt yourself. Alice blushed and lowered her head. In any case, if it were truly some awful outfit, I have to be mad to wear it outside. I don't know shame, you know. He immediately pulled her into his arms. He lifted her and strode away, leaving Reuben staring in astonishment. He did not forget to add, Reuben, come to my private office later. Reuben replied dejectedly, Yes, Your Grace. Alice panicked. Why on earth are you acting like this? Sir Reuben only helped guide me. He turned his face away without answering. Her expression soured as she thought to herself. Whenever he doesn't want to answer, he just goes silent. Watching the two of them leave, Reuben remarked, honestly, they really are husband and wife. Alice demanded of him. I can't understand why you're angry. She continued, if you don't want me leaving the bedroom, then you should just come sooner, shouldn't you? Then I wouldn't even think about going out. As for the things I'm supposed to do after coming here, ignoring her complaints, Election gently set her down on the bed. Indifferently, he replied, at present, I have little interest in that. She silently looked at him. Of course not, she thought. He has plenty of other choices besides me. The thought left her a little unhappy inside. In a huff, she said, then I don't need to sit here obediently waiting for you anymore. She went on, I'll ask Sir Reuben to show me around the territory instead. Those words startled him a little. Alice looked straight at him and snapped, move. Election could only remain silent and look at her. So now the two of them simply stood there facing one another. If it weren't for making a child, do we really have no reason to be together? He placed a hand on her shoulder and said softly, I understand what you want from me, princess. Pressing her gently down to sit on the bed, he said, the thing I hate most in this world is the act of joining bodies like beasts with someone I do not truly know. Election spoke heavily. I was born from exactly that. A monster conceived through rape, born by devouring my own mother. A monster blinded by lust would never care what becomes of the person beneath him. They are worse than beasts. He continued, my nature is not much different. That is why I try all the harder to keep my distance. He thought to himself, I believe that if I saw her less, it would fade on its own. But apparently that was not the case. His hand tightened on her shoulder. Your Grace. Alice hesitated. His hand touched her face. As expected, Election leaned closer to her. Looking at the woman before him, he thought, I want to have her, just as I did when I first saw her 3 years ago. I want to keep this beautiful woman all to myself. I want to hold this radiant woman in my hands, even if only for a while, perfect, untouched, and unharmed by anything at all. Pattinson had once said, if it is not longing, not desire, not pity, then what is it? He let out a self-mocking laugh. She was not wrong. He raised a hand and said, in any case, that is what I mean. After we come to understand each other a little better, he continued, we will use this place then. Alice asked, after we become closer? He answered, yes, after we become closer. She asked again, how long will it take? He replied, that depends on how the princess acts. Turning her face away shyly, she said, no, you're the one who has to try. You won't even let me see your face. She continued, it took a lot for me to come out and meet you, and all you do is get angry. He fell silent for a moment. Then suddenly he spoke. There's a festival in the square outside the city tomorrow. He held out his hand to her. He knelt before her and asked, would you like to go see it with me? Shyly, she placed her hand in his. Election sat quietly by the bed, watching her sleep. He remembered their conversation that afternoon, when he had asked, there's a festival outside the city tomorrow. Let's go together. Elisabetta had looked at him in surprise. What? Hesitantly, Elisabetta held out her hand and agreed. All right. Returning to the present, he looked at her and thought, we signed a contract. She can't keep avoiding this forever. He told himself, don't ruin this. Just take it slowly. Suddenly, Elisabetta murmured in her sleep, Andre. He looked at her in surprise. Her brows drew tight, and in a panic she cried out, wait. Elisabetta was dreaming of her twin younger brother. He shouted, get out of there, sister. You know Rotur isn't where you belong. Sweat drenched her body in tension. In the dream, Andre kept calling her back. Please come back, Elisabetta. At that moment, her whole body began to glow, and Election stared at her in shock. He reached out and lifted a lock of her hair to inspect it. He stared at the strand in his hand, confused. What is this? On the day of the festival, excitement and bustle filled every corner. Elisabetta's voice rang out. What a relief. It seems summer in the north isn't that hot after all. Election looked at her and asked, what do you mean, a relief? Wrapped up in a thick cloak, she waved her hand and said, even stuffed into these uncomfortable clothes, it's not unbearably hot. He reminded her, if you get tired, tell me. Elisabetta smiled and replied, I'm not tired at all. I've never had the chance to walk this far before, so I'm actually enjoying it. He repeated in surprise, you've never walked before? She answered, if I ever walked around for too long, Andre would come running right away. He'd immediately sweep me up in his arms and worry, saying stepping on the ground was dangerous. she said. I can still clearly remember that frantic look on his face, like he wanted to pick me up at once. It's exactly like you right now. Left speechless, he didn't know what to say. Elisabetta gave a small laugh, pointed ahead, and asked, "What's that?" Suddenly, he pulled down the hood over her head. "Election," she said, startled, not understanding what he was doing. He said, "Use my name. My title makes me too easy to recognize." She looked even more puzzled. But usually if you want to hide your identity, shouldn't you hide your name first?" She looked up at him and asked curiously, "By the way, who gave you your name?" He answered, "His Majesty bestowed it on me." She continued, "Then what did people call you before you met the emperor?" "I heard you entered the imperial palace at 9. He replied, "Before that, no one called me by any name. My life had no need for one." Hearing that, Elisabetta suddenly paused. She looked at his lonely back. Elisabetta called his name. "Election." Smiling softly, she said, "Then you should call me by my name too. After my parents died, only my younger brother ever called me by it." He looked at her in silence. Then it was his turn to ask, "What did the Emperor of Agen call your highness?" She replied, "Usually Elisabetta. Sometimes, when it was just the two of us, he called me Lily." Just then, a stranger bumped into her shoulder. Election quickly wrapped an arm around her and said, "You two must have spent a lot of time together." She answered, "I couldn't go outside, so my brother often came to my room." Looking around, she added, "There are so many people." He thought to himself, she couldn't go outside? It's as if someone was deliberately preventing her from leaving. That discomfort kept clinging to him. A faint aura seeped from that small body. Not the princess's own power, but some foreign magic. He thought, there can only be one person who would dare carve hidden magic into that body. He looked at her as she chatted with a vendor. Election called out, "Your Highness." She immediately corrected him. "Elisabetta." He tried again. "Elisabetta, compared to when you were in the Agan Empire, how does your body feel now?" Touching her arm, she replied, Strangely enough, much better." She continued, "It feels as if I survived by eating my own twin brother." With a faint smile, she added, "If that were really true, then you and I would have one more thing in common." Election. Pressing his lips together, he said nothing and only looked at her. Staring at a jar of bright red jam in front of her, Elisabetta wondered, "Is this cherry jam?" Meanwhile, he sank into thought. So after the emperor died, the health of his twin sister began to recover? He frowned. There is definitely something between the dead emperor of Agan and the princess. Then realization struck him, and his eyes widened. Dead? As though trying to show someone, Yugal had kept aiming for the princess's throat, and, in his dying breaths, Giannik had said to him, Be careful, Grand Duke." He had struggled to spit out his final words. "That silver fox. In the end, it'll devour you completely, then vanish without a trace, just like that slippery emperor of Agan." Suspicion rose in Election. Could it be? The emperor of Agan is still alive? He quietly watched Elisabetta's back. The first rays of sunlight poured into the castle. A maid struck up a conversation. Ever since His Grace and the princess went to the festival, they seem much closer than before, don't they? The maid beside her immediately replied, "You're right. They used to be so awkward around each other, to the point that we even thought Milady was pregnant." Election and Elisabetta were having breakfast together. The maid continued, "Lately, I've seen them eating breakfast together every day." In Election's study, he worked while Elisabetta sat reading intently. The maid added, "They're also spending more time in His Grace's office. Seeing them spend so much time together feels strangely surprising." At that moment, Elisabetta gently lifted her teacup. The other maid quickly argued, "But they're married, aren't they? Isn't it only natural for them to spend time together?" Just then, Elisabetta asked softly, "We've grown closer too, haven't we?" Still focused on the book in his hands, Election replied, "Do you think so?" Her gaze dimmed with sadness at those words. Right after that, Pattinson spoke up worriedly. "Your stomach is starting to show now, but it still isn't too noticeable. Perhaps it's because your figure is so slender." She quickly suggested, "Still, I think I should call the dressmaker. It won't hurt if your gown is finished sooner." Remembering that, Elisabetta thought to herself, if he would just take responsibility for what he promised, I wouldn't have to worry this much. Gloomily, she reflected, maybe I really do need to be more proactive with him. Suddenly, Election lightly touched her shoulder and called, "Princess." Elisabetta startled and looked up at him. Election asked with concern, "Did you have a nightmare again last night? You didn't eat much breakfast either. You look very pale." He quietly studied her expression and thought, did she dream about the emperor again? Election recalled an old memory. That day, Elisabetta had been lying motionless on the bed. He confirmed inwardly, ever since I broke the spell cast on her body, Elisabetta seems to sleep better than before. Election lowered his head in thought. There are no obvious signs on her body either. Elisabetta remained pale and silent. Watching her, Election hesitated. Then, his eyes fixed on her body as he wondered, do I need to take off her dress to make sure? Just then, Elisabetta spoke weakly. Is it because on the day we arrived, I insisted on exploring the castle on my own? Or because I told you Sir Reuben had already guided me around? Her words made Election blurt out in surprise. What did you say? Elisabetta slapped her hand on the table and answered seriously, if it isn't that, then is it because there are so many beautiful women here? After hearing that, Election let out a silent sigh. Soon after, he spoke softly. I don't care about anyone else. Looking at her tenderly, he added, the only one I care about is right in front of me. Hearing that, Elisabetta was too bewildered to respond. Shyly, she turned her face away from his gaze, her mind full of question marks. After calming herself, Elisabetta looked straight ahead. She said seriously, don't say things like that just to change the subject. I've never once managed to say what I really mean because you always distract me. Then fear rose inside her. Has he realized my life is in danger? Quiet tears slipped down Elisabetta's face as she leaned into Election's arms, thinking, and it's not as if he truly desires me either. At last, her emotions overflowed, and she confessed everything in her heart. You once said you didn't want to share a bed with a woman like me, and you were like that before too. Even now, you keep pretending you're not interested, and yet you still make me cling to false hope. Elisabetta stepped closer to Election, gently tugged at his clothes, and pleaded, be honest with me, Sir Election. She questioned him seriously. Do you really not want to do it with me? At her question, Election fell in a silent thought and did not answer a word. Then, suddenly, he pulled her into his arms and said, you're violating our contract. Election abruptly asked, how? Elisabetta immediately shot back. You promised to cooperate as much as you could. That was one of the conditions we agreed on. Unable to hold back her emotions, she cried out, and what exactly is this supposed to mean? If you want to persuade me, you should come up with a better excuse instead of moving this close. Election quietly observed her angry expression and thought, she's like an irritated little rabbit. Lowering her head, Elisabetta reproached him gloomily. It's not that you dislike me, but at the very least, you should make that much clear. By then, the two of them were pressed close together. Elisabetta thought helplessly, there he goes again, acting however he wants. Gripping his clothes tightly, she suddenly wondered, should I drag him onto the bed? Sunlight had already brightened the entire castle when Election finally said, Princess. Irritated, Elisabetta answered, stop calling me that. She declared sharply, there's no need to be so formal if you have no intention of obeying my orders. She said frankly, I don't want to be the one making advances on a man who isn't interested in me. It's not as if I'm trying so hard to do this, because I desire it that much. Elisabetta declared firmly, you're not even the type of man I... Before she could finish, what met her eyes was Election's handsome face and his white shirt, which revealed his strong, well-built body. Flustered, Elisabetta quickly turned her face away. Soon after, she steadied herself and said, I should go. They said the dressmaker would come early. The moment the words left her mouth, the teacup on the table was suddenly swept aside and shattered onto the floor. Election slammed a hand down on the table, leaned in close to her, and said, it seems. He placed his hand over hers and continued, that we're not so different after all. Bending down to stare at Elisabetta, Election said firmly, what I mean is, your taste in men. He reached out, grabbed hold of her, and teased, if you insist so strongly, princess, then go ahead and find one. Elisabetta answered with a trembling voice, find. Find what? With practiced ease, Election began unfastening the buttons on her dress one by one. Then he set her on the table and gently pressed a kiss to her chest as he continued, something you won't be able to resist. Tea spread across the floor like a warm puddle, and a soft, enchanting moan escaped her lips. Election kissed Elisabetta's neck, his hot breath brushing against her soft skin. Elisabetta hesitated and whispered softly, there. Wait a moment. His hand rested lightly against her back as he thought, is it beneath her left shoulder blade? Election lifted Elisabetta's clothing, his gaze intent. There has to be more. Looking at her, he felt deeply unsettled. This mark may have been left by her younger brother, but it still makes me uneasy. Elisabetta's cheeks flushed red as she softly called, "Election." "More." Dreamily, she murmured, "Come a little closer." Elisabetta's repeated calls startled Election slightly, and his heartbeat quickened. A chair suddenly toppled over as Elisabetta let out intoxicated moans. He pressed her down, devouring her neck with kisses, then slowly moved down to her chest. Every motion gentle yet commanding. Elisabetta savored every moment, wrapping Election tightly in her arms. Then suddenly, Election stopped. One of his hands abruptly became bound in chains, transforming into a sharp, solid wolf's paw. Elisabetta's body was already covered in the kiss marks he had left behind. Election thought. The magical power of a mighty dragon is bound inside the body of a frail human. I had to pierce through its dragon form the moment it lost control. This repulsive power nearly injured her delicate body. He clenched his teeth, caught between pain and worry. Election hurriedly asked, his voice urgent, "Are you all right?" Elisabetta raised her head, her eyes gentle. "I'm all right, but why did you stop?" "I think I figured it out," he said. "The reason we have to wait." She asked in confusion, "What?" He looked at her, thoughts racing. "I already left marks on her neck." Election blurted out, "Right, you need to gain weight." He added, "About 10 kilograms more. Otherwise, this won't work." "What?" While Elisabetta was bathing, Ibessa quietly reminded her, "There are so many love bites on your body, Your Highness. They'll turn into bruises soon." Elisabetta smiled bitterly and comforted herself. "It's fine. At least nothing is broken." Inwardly, she thought there must have been something that forced him to stop. Perhaps it was the ancient dragon Semikita. It may be because of the power hidden in his dragon blood. She stared blankly, uneasy. 10 kilograms. Can I really gain that much? Ibessa said worriedly, "I think it would be best to call the apothecary." "Please wait a moment." Elisabetta refused, her voice firm. "Already told you, I'm fine. The blood of an ancient dragon cannot harm Galleon's descendants. This is," she said with certainty, "no matter what, it was a vow between your people and the disciple." Elisabetta rested her arm on her knee and leaned against it. Or perhaps it was a vow between lovers. Elsewhere, Rihan shouted furiously, "Those cunning Agan bastards!" Those twins found exactly the same way to escape. Clenching his fist, he demanded angrily, "Have you found the Emperor yet?" Hannah hesitated. "Well," raising a brow in concern, she added, "I'd like to know how he managed to disappear too." Hannah continued, "I cut his Achilles tendon and even gouged out one of his eyes. So how could he possibly?" Rihan cut her off. "We need his power if we want to seize dragon magic." Grinding his teeth, he added, "I ordered him to kidnap the princess and use her as bait." Rihan cursed bitterly, his face full of resentment. "But that idiot made Vangela turn against us. How dared he go up against a dragon?" Hannah glanced at him and said quietly, "Hey, what if we spread a false rumor?" He frowned. "A rumor?" He explained, "It's like how a princess can use magic, for example. There really is something hidden inside that girl." "Magic?" Rihan pondered for a moment, tapping his finger on the table. "From what I can see, that little princess has value too. Otherwise, why would the fugitive emperor risk his life to protect his sister like that?" All right, I hear you." Hannah curled her lips into a smile, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Rihan gave a sinister smile, his voice cold and calculating. "We'll spread word that that little princess used magic to escape the dukes and was then captured by me, if she's really as valuable as you say." His eyes narrowed with scheming intent. "That runaway emperor will fall into the trap too. He won't be able to just sit there with his blind eyes while I beat the sister he treasures so much." Rihan clenched his fist so tightly that the veins stood out. His face looked eerie beneath the dim light. "We must capture both of them and force them to kneel before Yugal." A while later, colorful pastries were neatly arranged on the table. A maid said politely, "These are the sweets you requested, Your Grace." Election said in a low voice, "All right." The maids nodded and withdrew. Now only he and Elisabetta remained in the room. Without taking his eyes off the book in his hand, Election called her name. "Elisabetta, you don't need to stare at me like that. Eat a little, then go upstairs and rest." As Elisabetta reached out to try a cherry, she said, "Let's eat together." But Election answered bluntly, "I don't like sweets." A trace of sadness flickered in her eyes. Elisabetta seemed slightly disappointed as she asked, "Then what do you like? Or do you simply dislike doing anything with me? If that's the case, then just say so." When Elisabetta put the cherry in her mouth, the sweetness of the sugar and the fragrance of the fruit melted together on her tongue, making her tremble at the wonderful combination. Alexian silently lifted his eyes to observe his wife's reaction. He narrowed his eyes slightly. It was so delicious that happiness was plainly written across her flushed face. Seeing her reaction, the corner of Alexian's mouth lifted in a faint smile. He did not answer her question and simply continued reading. Meanwhile, Elisabetta seemed to like the cherry so much that she forgot what she had just asked and happily enjoyed it. After she finished eating, Elisabetta went into her bedroom. Dressed only in her corset, exposing the soft swell of her breasts, she looked at herself in the mirror and hummed. Then she looked down at the sheets of magic paper at her feet and said, "They're all piled up. This one was on my left shoulder, this one on my ankle, and this one on my spine." As Elisabetta retraced her memory, she thought to herself, "These are the magic circles Andre spent so much time and effort engraving onto my body. What do they do?" But then she brushed aside the thought, let out a sigh, and said, "Drawing them out like this probably won't help me find the answer. They must be one of the things Semita taught Gallion." But the moment she finished speaking, a strange magic circle suddenly appeared on the floor. Elisabetta stared at the mysterious light in shock. Yet the very next second, it vanished in the blink of an eye, leaving Elisabetta bewildered. Did I just do something? What exactly did I do? Don't tell me it was Semita. The instant she mentioned that name, the light appeared once more. But this time, it appeared behind her back. Clutching the sheet of magic paper tightly, Elisabetta thought, "The name of the ancient dragon is activating the magic circle. What kind of magic is this?" Semita. Semita had burned nearly half the continent and slaughtered countless innocent lives. Yet in the end, it was destroyed. Gallion, the one who had always followed the dragon and learned from it, was also the one who abandoned it. Instead, Semita cast upon its beloved disciple a curse that would ensure the disciple could never forget its name. Semita had once said to that disciple, "My first disciple, you who have become Grandel's new hero, whenever you use this power, you must remember the name of the one who was once your teacher. You will never escape me, just as I can never truly leave you." Elisabetta silently calculated. Semita could not kill Gallion, and Gallion could not forget Semita's name. Was it because of that curse? For now, I should keep an eye on these magic circles. If I can use magic, then even if I can't bear children. At that thought, her eyes darkened with sorrow. Elisabetta lowered her gaze and comforted herself. "It will help me if I ever have to escape. Anyway, have I gained any weight yet? I think I look well proportioned like this. If I keep forcing him to sleep with me, will I get thrown out?" Just then, the door suddenly opened. Alexian stepped into the room. It seemed he had heard what she had just said, and he asked, "Who would?" She answered in a low voice, "Obviously me." As Alexian removed his gloves, he asked, "Who would dare throw you out?" But when he raised his eyes to look at her, he froze for a second. Elisabetta startled as well. She looked at her husband and awkwardly let out, "Oh." Alexian slowly walked toward her, making her unconsciously step backward. Unexpectedly, he gently draped her robe back over her shoulders and softly asked, "Princess." Taken aback by this sudden intimate gesture, Elisabetta quickly recoiled. Alexian, too, looked away awkwardly. As she pulled the robe over her chest, she stammered, I was just..." A trace of sadness suddenly appeared on Alexian's face, and he said quietly, "I hope this isn't how you're rejecting me." Hearing that, Elisabetta immediately turned back and protested, "No, not at all. What about you? You came in here on purpose, didn't you?" He replied, "Of course not." Regaining her serious expression, Elisabetta continued, "I'm the same as you. I would never deliberately take off my clothes just to show off." As she said that, a thought suddenly occurred to her. Wait, this might be my chance. Thinking that, Elisabetta took the initiative and stepped toward her husband, speaking in a coy voice. "You can check for yourself. See whether I've met the standard for gaining weight yet. Don't you want to?" By the time she finished saying that, the outer robe had already slipped halfway down, and even the corset could not fully conceal her soft curves. Pressing herself against Alexian, Elisabetta whispered, "You should see for yourself, just to be sure." Alexian called her name awkwardly. "Elisabetta." As he spoke, he gently pulled the robe back up over her shoulders. I don't need to see it with my own eyes. The apothecary reports your condition to me every day. Elisabetta lifted her eyes and asked, "Don't tell me that report includes my weight too?" "Of course it does," he replied. Those words struck Elisabetta like a bolt of lightning. Her eyes immediately welled up as if she might cry. Her cheeks flushed pink, and her face clearly showed a sulky pout. Then she grabbed at her robe and coldly turned away, leaving Election with only one low remark. "You really are awful." Inwardly, she thought, at this rate, when will he and I ever? But he stepped closer to her. Election draped his own cloak over Elisabetta, yet she only said coldly, "This won't make me feel better, you know." Election replied gently, "I know, but please, don't be angry with me." As he said that, he slowly lowered his head and placed a kiss on her neck. Elisabetta turned away with a blush, but still answered him. "How can me being angry at you possibly affect you?" Election stepped back and continued, "I'll be away for a few days." Elisabetta merely let out a bored, "Oh." Her hand tightened around his cloak. She wondered to herself, is that why he's suddenly being so gentle? Then Elisabetta asked quietly, "May I ask why?" Election answered in detail, without hesitation. "My cycle comes once every 4 months or so. During that time, after I return to my true form as a dragon, I cannot meet anyone. But the cycle never lasts more than 10 days. At last, Elisabetta decided to ask him directly. "You said we could do that as long as I gained enough weight." Election lightly stroked the ends of her hair and gently instructed, "I know you still haven't gained nearly 10 kilograms. Please eat properly while I'm away. Eat well and sleep well. And if you want to leave this castle, remember to cover your face like last time, and always take a guard with you." Even in the face of those soothing words, Elisabetta could not stop thinking negatively. This man always broke his promises and extinguished her hopes. He threw her into the depths of despair while acting innocent. If this keeps up, I'll have to find another way. But I know what I need to do, and yet, what am I supposed to do when autumn is drawing near, but I no longer want to leave? Seeing that his wife gave no response, Election called to her, "Princess." Elisabetta said coldly, "If you won't be this kind to me by autumn, then stop acting like this now." That clearly surprised him, and he asked, "What did you say?" Summoning all her courage, she voiced her thoughts directly to his face. "Just as you once told me, I have only a little knowledge and not the slightest life skill to stand on my own and survive outside. I'm gullible and easily taken advantage of, and there was one thing she only dared keep in her heart and could not bring herself to say aloud. I can't stop seeking the warmth you give me anymore." Elisabetta continued, "What I mean is, it feels like you've forgotten all about the contract between us. Without me, you'll have to endure endless pressure from His Majesty, who is always eager for grandchildren. This isn't just about staying alive. I want to do something to help you too, and I want to understand you better as well." Hearing that, Election's heart stirred. He immediately asked her to confirm it. "Elisabetta, what did you just say?" But she had already turned her face away and answered irritably, "No need to worry if you didn't hear me clearly. Just promise me you won't stay away too long." Her words made Election think, this woman, perhaps she's more fox than rabbit. And please remember this too. Without you, Rotier is no longer a safe place for me. Her words made Election think, this woman, perhaps she's more fox than rabbit. In other words, no matter what, she is certainly very good at seducing me. I'm at my limit. Although Elisabetta was still somewhat upset with her husband, she gently laced her fingers with his and carefully told him, "Please be careful on your trip. Don't get hurt." Election answered softly, "All right, I'll be back soon." 2 days after Election left the castle, a servant entered the room and announced something that made Elisabetta stare blankly in confusion. "Who did you say?" The maid answered awkwardly, "Yes, Your Highness. The daughter of Duke Irian has arrived, an uninvited guest. She came to deliver a message from His Majesty." This guest was a blonde young woman. She was leisurely sipping the coffee in her hand, a satisfied smile resting on her lips. She thought to herself, "I've finally made it to Rotier." The moment Elisabetta entered the room with Pattinson, an arrogant voice rang out at once. "So, I finally get to meet the mistress of Rotier Castle." The speaker was an extremely haughty young lady. Sitting in her chair, she greeted Elisabetta. "A pleasure to meet you, Your Highness the Princess. My name is Gino via Irian." Elisabetta said nothing, but thought to herself, as expected. Just from the way Gino via could not even be bothered to stand up and greet me, she realized one thing. This woman has no manners at all. Then she recalled when Pattinson had informed her of Genovia's arrival. "You want me to receive a guest?" Pattinson had answered respectfully, "Yes, Your Highness." Then she added, "She has brought a message from His Majesty, so I invited her into the drawing room." Hearing that, Elisabetta had said in some confusion, "But I don't even know anything about her." So Pattinson had given her a bit of information about Genovia. She's a young lady of 23 this year, and the only daughter of Duke Irian, one of His Majesty's closest advisors. But as she said that, Pattinson's voice suddenly sank. "She is also—" The next word shocked Elisabetta a little. "The woman His Majesty has strongly recommended to marry the Grand Duke over the past several years." Pattinson then explained, "The Grand Duke always refuses, but she still continues to visit Roteur at this time of year, as though it has become an annual event." In an even tone, she added, "In any case, many women have always trailed after the Grand Duke in this castle." Startled, Elisabetta blurted out, "What?" Without much thought, she took that to mean, "Is that what you're trying to tell me? That the woman His Majesty recommended to the Grand Duke is still here, serving in this castle?" Pattinson only remained silent for a moment in response. Then she said slowly, "If that is so." Her next question struck straight at Elisabetta's heart. "Will you accept the humiliation of becoming the Grand Duke's invisible wife, Your Highness?" She then emphasized one thing. "I do not know how you view yourself, Your Highness, but you must remember this. As the Grand Duke's wife, you possess nearly all the same authority here as he does." Back in the present, seeing that Elisabetta did not answer her greeting, Genovia mockingly said, "You do not answer my greeting. Is it because you are a princess?" Unexpectedly, Elisabetta spoke up. "I believe I am also very pleased to meet you." The remark made Genovia falter slightly as she said, "You believe so?" Elisabetta calmly continued, "That's right, Genovia." Taking on the role of hostess, she welcomed her guest. "Welcome to Roteur." At that, Genovia picked at Elisabetta's manners. Just as when one is in Vangeler, one should observe its proper hierarchy and etiquette. But perhaps you know nothing about that. Yet even being challenged so bluntly, Elisabetta did not get angry and merely murmured, "Etiquette?" Then she answered directly by referring to Genovia's earlier discourtesy. "You wish to speak of my manners? I assumed you meant to signal that the two of us could dispense with formalities, seeing as you remained seated from the moment I entered." Caught out, Genovia did not show the slightest embarrassment and merely remarked, "Oh my, you're rather interesting." Seeing the tension rising, Pattinson quickly stepped in to smooth things over. "My lady, the princess must be careful not to strain herself. And according to Vangeler's order of precedence, this is proper." Since Pattinson had put it that way, Genovia could not be bothered to argue further and merely said proudly, "Oh, right. After all, you're the Grand Duke's wife. Very well then, Your Highness the Princess, I shall be more courteous." Then she tossed a rolled letter onto the table and said, "This is a message from His Majesty. Since the Grand Duke is not here, you should open it in his place." After that, she rose and declared, "I will remain at the castle until I receive an answer from you. His Majesty ordered me not to return unless I bring back a reply." Having delivered the message, she turned to Pattinson and asked, "I'll go to the room I usually use, shall I, steward?" Pattinson bowed respectfully and answered, "I will call for several maids to attend to you." Soon only Elisabetta remained in the room, unrolling the letter. A little later, inside the study, she spoke aloud. "It clearly says that the money Roteur paid in tribute to the palace last autumn was less than in previous years." Her words made the steward cry out in alarm. "Please forgive me, but that cannot be." He replied in confusion, "Last autumn, the Grand Duke was away at war, so we were especially careful with the ledgers. We checked everything over many times." Even Alfredo stepped forward to add his confirmation. "He's right, and all the books we managed were reported to the Grand Duke." He believed that if the Grand Duke had inspected them personally, then there could not possibly have been any mistake. However, Elisabetta insisted, "Then why are the numbers so wildly different?" Hearing that, Savick guessed that perhaps someone had embezzled part of the tribute after it left Roteur. Alfredo agreed with him. That would make sense. After hearing the two of them speak, Elisabetta immediately said that things like this were usually done by insiders, so they needed to investigate thoroughly. Then Pattinson spoke up. "Roteur's servants all need to be examined carefully. The Grand Duke personally selected each of them, so we should start with those who are regularly involved." Those words made Elisabetta repeat, "Examined carefully?" Then she suddenly asked, "Do you know why Agan was utterly defeated when it fought against the kingdom of Ugal?" without hiding anything. She revealed the weakness that had destroyed her kingdom. My younger brother, one of Emperor Aides' aides, told Yugal all of our strategies. Then she emphasized, "What I mean is that none of you should rule out anyone within our ranks as a possible suspect." Upon receiving her order, the 3 loyal attendants immediately answered in unison, "Yes, Your Highness." Suddenly, Alfredo hesitated before blurting out, "Then, in that case, Your Highness." He pulled out a stack of documents from nowhere and set them on Elisabetta's table, startling her badly. "Could you review the reports that Savitt and I submitted? I think it would be best if we proved our innocence first, so the search can proceed more quickly." Looking at the mountain of papers, she asked uneasily, "You want me to read all of this?" At the same time, in the hallway, Genovia was returning to her room with a servant. She glanced around at everything without saying a word. After a moment of silence, she finally asked, "How long has the princess been here?" The servant stammered, "About a month and a half, my lady." After hearing the answer, Genovia muttered, "A month and a half." Then a sly smile curved across her lips. Very good. It seemed she wanted to do something. She simply needed to confirm it herself. At sunset on that barren land, 2 soldiers were hiding behind a tent. One of them asked, "He's calmed down now, right?" Looking at the bloodstains on the ground, the other replied, "No, not yet." He noticed Election's dragon arm and said, "His left arm still hasn't returned to normal." He also warned his companion, "If you want to survive." Looking at the killing intent on Election's face, he stressed, "You'd better not go near him right now." A little later, in a sunlit room, a soft sound of frustration came from someone diligently writing something. Elisabetta complained tiredly. "I feel like I'm just making my own life harder." Remembering that day, as she looked at the pile of documents on her desk, she had asked helplessly, "You want me to read all of this?" Alfredo had hesitated before replying, "Of course, we will report it to the Grand Duke." But he said helplessly, "If you read through them first, it will make things much easier." Savitt added, "If the Grand Duke finds out about this, he won't forgive us." Whenever he recalled the Grand Duke's murderous expression, he trembled slightly as he explained, "Besides, when he returns from trips like this, he always stays irritable for at least a week. His mood becomes very unstable." Alfredo, sweating nervously, added, "He might even slit our throats before we have a chance to explain." Hearing that, Elisabetta cried out in confusion, "Slit your throats." Pattinson spoke in a low voice, making Election's unpleasant temperament clear. He tends to become very violent when dealing with matters like this. Those words made Elisabetta wonder, "Violent? I never sensed that from him on this trip." Savitt wearily confirmed, "Yes, of course, because he doesn't treat you the way he—" Before he could finish, Pattinson cleared her throat and cut him off. "In any case, it would be better if you handled this, Princess. If the Grand Duke is forced to do it, there may be unwanted bloodshed." She even suggested, "This would also be a good opportunity for you to send the Grand Duke a short letter." That suggestion made Elisabetta blink in confusion. A letter. Back in the present, looking at the pile of crumpled letters on her desk, she asked herself awkwardly, writing to Election. Would that be too intimate? Somewhat flustered, she collapsed onto the desk and muttered, "It's not like I've never written a letter to anyone before." Deep down, she thought that maybe if he received this letter from her, he might return quickly. A blushing memory rose in her mind, Election gently kissing her neck. Remembering that made Elisabetta blush, and she told herself, "How can I miss him this quickly?" Just as she was lost in thought, a voice suddenly rang out. "Who are you writing to?" Genovia appeared out of nowhere and asked, "Your husband?" She acted terribly polite as she instructed Elisabetta on proper behavior. "You should address him by his title and family name. If it's an official letter, even I pay attention to etiquette when I write." She even mocked Elisabetta. "You may choose not to show me any courtesy, but you cannot fail to respect the Grand Duke. I mean, after all, he saved you." Those words left Elisabetta's heart in turmoil as she wondered, do they write letters to each other? And if she says she knows how to conduct herself when writing, then does that mean? Suddenly, she remembered what Election had once said. "Not many people call me by my name, but once I live a life that had no need for a name." Thinking of that, her heart ached, and she told herself, "But this has nothing to do with me." Elisabetta's hand clenched. Her gaze turned toward Genovia, and she thought to herself, "It isn't worth letting myself get dragged into this. If I deliberately make things difficult for her, I'll only lower myself to her level." Feeling Elisabetta's stare on her, Genovia turned to look at her and let out a short cry. "Hey, Annoyed, she asked, "You're looking at me as if you despise me." Then she suddenly smiled and sneered at Elizabetta. "You only did what you had to in order to survive, and yet you act so noble and high and mighty." Those words irritated Elizabetta, and she stood up at once. Angry, she warned her, "If you came here only to say things like that, then I ask you to leave." Her attitude amused Genovia, and she rose to her feet, stepping toward Elizabetta one pace at a time. Then she grabbed Elizabetta's hand roughly and asked, "Since when did you think you could stand above me?" Arrogantly, she sneered, "Do you think the whole world is beneath your feet just because the Grand Duke is clinging to you?" Still cold and composed, Elizabetta answered calmly, "It would be nice if that were true." Her indifferent attitude irritated Genovia, who snapped, "You really are." Then she threatened Elizabetta, "You shouldn't look down on me like this, princess." Seeing that Genovia had gone too far, Elizabetta stepped back and warned, "If you cross the line, I will call someone." Without the slightest fear, Genovia only laughed contemptuously and said, "Oh really?" Then she tightened her grip on Elizabetta's arm and challenged her, "Go ahead, call someone." Her threat startled Elizabetta slightly. "Because I'll reveal your secret to anyone who comes in here." Frightened, Elizabetta cried out, "What are you trying to?" But Genovia cut her off. "You seem to understand exactly what I mean. It's all over your face." After saying that, Genovia placed a hand on Elizabetta's stomach and said, "See?" The moment she brought up Elizabetta's pregnancy, Elizabetta jolted in shock. "You claimed you were pregnant, so why won't you let anyone see your stomach, princess?" Elizabetta's brows drew together slightly. Genovia spoke slowly. "It's been at least 3 months since you became pregnant. Of course, at first it's hard to tell." With a deeply contemptuous tone, she exposed her. "But your stomach cannot still be that flat." Genovia gripped her upper arm tightly and refused to let go. "I knew it. I knew something was strange." Then she lowered her voice and demanded, "Election Kiston, captivated by a woman? A man who likes to collect his victories and simply admire them." Elizabetta ground her teeth and endured the insults. How ridiculous. Unable to bear it any longer, Elizabetta shoved her hand away. "Let go." Her gaze was sharp as she said slowly, "I think you've come to believe that doing everything exactly as you please is only natural because you've always been one of the most powerful women in Vangelar." Then she reproached her, "But I didn't realize you could be this insolent." At that, the corner of Genovia's mouth curled upward. "Look at how hard you're trying to preserve your dignity." The sound of high heels slowly approached. She whispered something into Elizabetta's ear that left her speechless. "Don't you understand? The moment I tell the whole palace this truth, you'll be cast aside." But Elizabetta regained her composure and quietly asked, "Is that what you want?" Hearing that, Genovia asked back, "What do I want?" She reached out and touched a lock of Elizabetta's hair. "What I want is for you to stop acting like the Grand Duke's wife." She added, "Unfortunately, it seems you won't get the chance to bear his child after all. So keep pretending. 2 or 3 children would be even better." Her voice continued, thick with sarcasm. "That way, I won't have to bear the burden of carrying his seed when I become the Grand Duchess. You understand what I mean, don't you?" A few days later, "Are you all right, princess?" Ibetsa spoke softly. "You've looked terribly pale ever since Lady Genovia came to visit." Elizabetta only clenched the blanket in silence. Suddenly, she recalled Genovia's words again. "I'm sure many people in this castle know your secret, and if you keep watching for a few more days, you'll find out who they are. But princess, do you think the king will forgive those accomplices?" Silently, Elizabetta thought, "I should have added a clause to the contract protecting the people who know my secret. I should do as she demands until I find a way to deal with Genovia." Then Ibetsa spoke again. "By the way, it has been 8 days since the Grand Duke left. I'm sure you'll feel better once he returns." Only then did Elizabetta finally speak. "You're right." Elizabetta's eyes dimmed for a moment. "It would be so good if you were by my side at times like this." That night, as she slept soundly in bed, someone suddenly called her name. "Alice! Alice!" The voice startled her awake. Andre pleaded loudly, "Please, you have to stay away from him." At that moment, she unconsciously called his name. "Andre, your eyes." Unable to bear it, he embraced her and confessed, "You know the descendants of Gallion cannot have a child with one descended from Semita." Tears welled in Elizabetta's eyes at once. "You have to escape before your feelings grow any deeper. Please, don't let unwanted emotions control you." Then Andre urged her not to let that man steal her power. "Alice, wait until I come to take you away." A loud sound rang out, and in the middle of the night, she woke with a start. "Andre." Then she sat up. I know I know that, but I don't know what to do. Elisabetta could not hold back her tears. I don't know how to get out of here. Her voice trembled as she confessed, right now, all I want is for him to come back to me quickly. That night, a fire suddenly appeared in the middle of the forest. Reuben asked softly, My lord, did something happen in Rotir? Looking at the letter in his hand, Election replied, An uninvited guest has arrived. Reuben's face darkened. Don't tell me. Is it that mad Irian family? Duke Irian's daughter has gone to Rotir at his majesty's request. It seems there is a traitor among us who took part of Rotir's tribute. So it seems I must hunt down that traitor as soon as I return. And then, his pupil shrank. I hope you come back soon. A thought flashed through his mind. Was she worried? The image of their hands touching surfaced. You must promise not to stay away too long. And please remember that without you, Rotir is no longer a safe paradise for me. Election pressed his lips tightly together. Right now, I can't suppress the dragon's instincts any longer. Then he ground his teeth and called softly, Reuben. Yes. Election turned his head and said, We're returning to Rotir. Bring me my horse. Meanwhile, a lavish dinner table had already been prepared. The dishes looked incredibly appetizing. The Grand Duke began his journey back early this morning. Pattinson slowly delivered the news. He will return before midnight. He sent word that you need not wait for him and should go to sleep early. Pattinson added, I suggest that you put today's work aside and return to your room to rest early. You look too pale, princess. My, how many times have you said that today? Genovia spoke again, mocking her. Why don't you stay a little longer and enjoy a pleasant conversation with me? Princess, two people is rather dull, so we could call your personal maid in as well. Elisabetta clenched her hands tightly to suppress her anger. Then Genovia turned to Abetsa and asked, What about you? What do you think? Elisabetta quickly replied, I will spend some time with Lady Genovia, but Elisabetta asked softly, Could you give us some privacy? Wine began to be poured. You can drink, since you're not actually pregnant. Then Genovia raised her glass toward Elisabetta. Please. Elisabetta quickly refused. I don't like drinking. At that, Genovia replied, I wasn't giving you a choice. Elisabetta fell silent for a moment, but then she reached out. Lady Genovia, you said you wanted me to become pregnant. In that case, you shouldn't be asking me to drink. The wine in the glass was poured straight out, leaving Genovia speechless. Elisabetta continued, You may be perfectly fine after one glass, or even an entire barrel, but it could truly kill me. Are you threatening me? Genovia regained her composure and said, Very well. Then let's talk about something interesting instead. She bared her teeth in a smile. The Grand Duke, does he treat you well? Have the two of you slept together yet? The atmosphere suddenly fell silent. Elisabetta set her hand down on the table. That is none of your business. If you don't intend to rush to the king and accuse me, then stop interrogating me. I've already been more than patient with you. Genovia looked at her with a sharp gaze. Elisabetta said firmly, If you want something from me, then you should not treat me this way. Genovia lifted the wine glass to her lips. What? Because you'll leave this place without even a single child, won't you? She said meaningfully, as if she already knew the princess had only just begun planning her escape. Elisabetta listened in silence to every word Genovia spoke. What do I want from you? The Princess of Agon has already lost her entire empire. Start over in Rotir and live here forever. Don't make me laugh. Do you really think the Grand Duke will let it go if he learns the truth? You should run. Those words made her suddenly freeze. That image appeared in her mind and whispered in her ear whenever she felt afraid. He had even added that if she could, then she should do it. Her voice trembled slightly as she replied, He said it wouldn't matter to him. He must remember, because he was the one who told me that I could leave whenever I wanted. Hearing that, Genovia's pupils contracted in shock. Then Genovia questioned her sharply. The Grand Duke said that to you? That you could leave if you wanted? And then she suddenly burst into crazed laughter. Haha, what is this? Then things are getting interesting. He was kind enough to say something like that to you? He never said those words to me. Elisabetta fell silent and thought to herself that something really must have happened between the two of them. Gripping the hem of her dress tightly, she wondered if they had once. An image of the two of them standing in an intimate pose appeared in her mind. Were they lovers? Had they slept together? Then Genovia slowly stepped closer. It seems his grace treats you in a very special way. Princess. She placed a hand on Elisabetta's shoulder. If you were not a princess, he would have killed you the moment you were captured. But Elisabetta answered with unexpected calm, Don't speak of him like that. At least to me, he is the noblest man in Vangelar. Hearing that, Genovia sneered. Oh, I see. Then you've made a very serious mistake. Suddenly, Genovia hesitated. Should I tell you the things you don't know about election, Kiston? Kiston, the name granted to him by His Majesty, means one who reveres the ancient tongue. He is someone who obeys power and handles it gently. He acts as though he would offer it up to the whole world. That is how he is with the king, and with me as well. There are no exceptions. Her voice grew harsher and harsher. That is how he deceives everyone. Genovia clenched her hands so tightly they trembled. He is merely a dragon, yet he is treated as though he were noble and mighty, never caring what others think. And yet, she did not deny one thing. Power truly is enticing. After all, this is Rotir, the blessed land of the north. So at the very least, I must have his name. Bear even just one child for me. Genovia's voice turned eerie as she repeated herself. Have one child and give it to me. She continued whispering into Elisabeta's ear. Consider an exchange. I promise I will send you back to Agon. It seemed Elisabeta had not yet fully grasped all of Genovia's schemes, and she could only stare blankly and murmur, "What?" Then Genovia raised her hand and revealed something else. This autumn, the Imperial Guard will come to inspect your pregnant belly. It was a warning edged with threat. When that happens, you won't be the only one in danger. Elisabeta went slightly pale and began to tremble. But Genovia was not done. She dragged everyone close to Elisabeta into it as well. The apothecary who examined you, and that loyal maid of yours too, or perhaps everyone in Rotir Castle except the Grand Duke, could be executed for conspiring to deceive the Emperor. Those words were enough to shatter Elisabeta's composure. Fear overtook her, and she clutched at her heart in distress. Only Genovia remained perfectly at ease. She leaned back against the cushions, spread her arms, and asked lightly, "If that really happens, will election still save you? Would he be willing to give up even his position for the sake of a trophy that has already lost its shine? Once such a dangerous secret is exposed, no one can remain safe." So Genovia pressed harder, trying to coax her in. "That is why you should come to my side, Elisabeta. Don't you want to go home?" The question left her deeply shaken. She pressed her hands to her chest and frowned in confusion. Unlike the sweet tone she had used earlier, Genovia now rested her chin on one hand as Elisabeta asked, "Why have you suddenly changed your attitude?" At that question, Genovia glanced aside and drawled, "Well, at last, the venomous snake revealed her true nature." Genovia lifted her calculating, dangerous face and answered, "Because your Grand Duke is on his way back. If you want to leave here alive, you'll still need my help." She did not bother to hide her intentions any longer. "I am willing to raise the child you're carrying and even send you home. Isn't that generous enough for you?" Though inwardly shaken and almost swayed, Elisabeta's faith in election remained firm, and she insisted, "I don't trust you. You must be plotting something." As the tense conversation continued, a voice suddenly called from outside the door. "Princess." Pattinson appeared, placing a hand over her chest and bowing her head as she reported, "The Grand Duke has returned." Genovia let out an irritated sigh and raised a hand mockingly. "Look who is in such a hurry. I thought he wouldn't be back until tonight." Rising from her chair, Genovia walked past Elisabeta and stressed one last time, "Well then, think carefully about what I said. I don't imagine you'll go running to your husband like a stray little dog and tattle on me." Refusing to let Elisabeta have even a moment of happiness first, Genovia curled her lips in jealous mockery and added, "Think about those other people whose lives will be put on the scales instead, all right?" Those few threats alone were enough to leave Elisabeta, already in emotional turmoil, standing there stunned. It was not even that late anymore. Night had already fallen, and the full moon shone over the great wooden stables. Reuben stood on the stone steps, clutching his stomach and complaining, "Why did you have to ride back so fast? I feel awful." Bleh. As Election, commander of the order, stroked his warhorse's chin, he suddenly turned slightly, suspicion crossing his face. It was Elisabeta, hurrying out from inside toward the gate as fast as she could, her expression a mixture of worry and anticipation. It seemed at first that her welcome would be for him. Yet as the scene drew closer to the horse's legs, Elisabeta really did run straight to the horse and throw her arms around its muzzle, smiling in relief as she said, "Hello, hello, sweetheart." And the horse looked just as happy to see the princess, narrowing its eyes contentedly. Gently stroking it, Elisabeta looked over its whole body and asked, "Are you all right? It doesn't look like you're hurt." left completely ignored on the spot. Poor Election could only look on in regret and jealousy as he called out earnestly, "Princess." Stepping over to Elisabetta, he gazed warmly at her lovely face and said in a spoiled tone, "I'm the one who should be asked those questions." She had actually ignored him. Election shot the warhorse a look that suggested he was ready to lecture at length, then folded his arms and ordered, "Back into the stable." "Don't make me say it again." Only after the horse slowly walked back inside did Election turn his attention back to her and ask gently, "It's already past bedtime. Why are you still up?" But he seemed to notice at once that something was wrong with Elisabetta. She was absent-minded, not attentive to him as usual, and so he called again, "Princess." Election cupped her cheeks lightly in both hands and, seeing her flushed face and tear-bright eyes, asked in concern, "Are you all right?" But with Genovia's words still carved into her mind, Elisabetta did not dare act intimately with him. She pulled her face from his hands and answered coldly, "I don't know what you mean, but I am fine." Without saying anything more, he simply lifted one hand and gently stroked the hair of the woman he loved. He drew a strand of hair close to his nose, sniffed it lightly, and said, "You smell like alcohol." And it was true. Elisabetta could not argue, so she only fell silent and admitted it inwardly. Election's expression darkened at once, murderous intent seeming to gather around him as he stared at the princess. Elisabetta leaned back and stammered defensively, No, that's right, I haven't even had a single sip," afraid that staying with him too long would not end well. And troubled despite her concern, she took a few uneasy steps back and informed him, "Everyone is waiting for you in the study. You should go inside. I've seen your face now, so I'm going to bed." He had only just returned to see his wife again, and the whole reason he had hurried back at full speed was for Elisabetta, so Election had no intention of letting her go so easily. He wrapped an arm around her waist and lifted her into a princess carry so that their faces were close together. Though a little disappointed, Election still treated Elisabetta with great tenderness and asked softly, "Allow me to escort you." All of it happened right in front of the maids and servants nearby, who all blushed at the sight. Embarrassed, Elisabetta protested, "Everyone is watching Election." But the man she loved did not seem concerned at all, replying, "They've seen it before, haven't they?" And so the commander simply carried her along the path, lit by strips of light. Elisabetta said, "That's not what I meant." Then, out of nowhere, just as everything had been calm, Genovia appeared and blocked the two of them. Feigning surprise, she exclaimed, "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Lowering her fan, Genovia revealed a crooked smile, sly and sharp with deceit, as she greeted him intimately, "My beloved knight." At the sight of her, all of Election's suspicions turned toward her at once, and he said, "It seems she's the one who's been drinking." Deluded by her own imagined status, Genovia gave a proud, arrogant little laugh. "My, you have no intention of greeting me properly, do you, Grand Duke?" There was no pointless hostility in Election's tone. He answered the daughter of Duke Irian with perfect politeness, "My apologies, but you do not seem particularly interested in exchanging proper greetings either." That only made Genovia bristle more, and she snapped on the spot, "No wonder the two of you got married. The two of you answer in exactly the way that drives me mad." Yet Election still looked faintly puzzled as he asked, "What do you mean by that?" Hearing their entire exchange, Elisabetta became even more tangled in her thoughts. In that moment, she imagined the two of them close together, skin against skin, and thought those two. Then she questioned herself again. Could it be that I misunderstood the relationship between them? After going around in circles long enough, Genovia finally closed her eyes and sighed in irritation. No, that's right. I haven't had a single sip. Forget it. In any case, I already know what you think of me." Not wanting to stay there any longer, Election bluntly carried Elisabetta past her and said coldly, "I'm glad you know that. That saves me the trouble of deciding whether I should apologize or not." To remind and warn her, Genovia was insidious enough to make even ordinary words sound poisonous. "I'll see you tomorrow, Elisabetta. Let's spend some more time together." Knowing that nothing good lay behind Genovia's words, Election calmly instructed Elisabetta, "Don't listen to her." Seeing the worry in her eyes, he added, "Just focus on what I say." And so Genovia simply stood there, watching Election carry Elisabetta away without saying another word. No one could know what dangerous scheme she was smiling over then, her eyes unreadable and almost mad. After that thoroughly unwelcome encounter in the corridor, once they returned to Elisabetta's room, Election asked with some concern, "You spent quite a lot of time with Duke Irian's daughter, didn't you?" But instead of answering, she chose to voice the question that had been on her mind all this time. "Why did it take you so long to come back this time?" That left Election momentarily startled and confused. Thoughtfulness and a trace of sadness were plain on Elisabetta's face. Her amber eyes were lowered slightly, her gaze distant and unfocused. Knowing that he had made her wait for him in vain, Election answered sincerely, "I'm sorry. It took longer this time than I expected. Sometimes it may take even longer than that." Spreading one hand in front of him, Election blamed himself. "I should have limited how long any outsiders could stay in the castle while I was away. This is my fault. I'll have her driven out of here soon, so don't worry." But those words did nothing to brighten Elisabetta. On the contrary, she looked even more frightened. Now that they were finally together, she confessed what had been on her mind. "I heard. She once asked to be betrothed to you." Rather than flatly denying it, Election looked aside awkwardly and corrected her. That was a very long time ago. But Elisabetta only pouted, unable to accept it, and said with quiet jealousy, 3 years is not that long. And so Election could only tilt his head to one side and say, "I really don't remember it very clearly." It was not truly his fault, yet Election still looked embarrassed, with a guilty expression on his face. Elisabetta still loved him deeply, and so she took the initiative to voice her feelings. "I heard that she pursued you very persistently, and I started wondering whether I have ever been that devoted myself." Because of that, Elisabetta felt hesitant and uneasy, unable to take any joy in Election's attention. But to him, the answer was obvious. "Of course you have." The Grand Duke emphasized her place in his heart. "She cannot compare to even a fraction of you, my lady." Then he gently lifted one of Elisabetta's feet. Knowing she was uncomfortable wearing heels for so long, Election moved to help her take off her shoes. Elisabetta grew so shy that even her feet flushed red, and she protested in a panic, "I'll call Betsa." But the commander remained firm. "I can do it." Afraid that she might no longer be worthy of his care, Elisabetta blushed and awkwardly urged him, "Tish, that's enough. You should go. Savit is probably waiting for you in the office." Knowing that her heart was in turmoil, he called her name with firm confusion in his voice. "Elisabetta, you wrote to me, hoping I would return soon, and now that I have come back, you keep trying to send me away." In response to her behavior, Election gently slipped the shoe from her foot and said with a faintly hurt tone, "I was hoping for a different reaction when I returned early, but you only seem to want to get rid of me as quickly as possible." It seemed that anxiety and fear had completely taken over her mind. Only after hearing the commander's honest confession did Elisabetta suddenly realize it. Though somewhat sad, Election was still deeply understanding toward her. He gently pressed a kiss to her foot as Elisabetta thought, "No matter who or what he sees me as." Her thoughts had a pause for a moment when he noticed her expression and suggested, "You still look a little pale. I'll call the apothecary." But instead of paying attention to that, Elisabetta only said his name, "Election." Only now did she finally feel able to reveal the feelings she had been holding back. "I missed you." Election had no time to prepare himself for that, and his eyes widened in surprise. Elisabetta threw herself toward him and wrapped her arms around him. Pressing herself against his warm, safe shoulders, Elisabetta sobbed softly. Her cheeks flushed red as she finally voiced the restlessness and grievance in her heart. "Next time, take me with you. I don't want to stay here alone at all." Hearing the feelings she had been suppressing, Election loved her so much it hurt, and for a moment he could not speak. Patting her shoulder gently to soothe her and help her feel secure, he answered steadily, "All right." Holding her tightly and closing his eyes as he felt her warmth, Election said only a few words. "I'll do that." And then the two of them finally went to rest. Early the next morning, the commander was already standing by the window in his office, receiving the sunlight. He stared at his reflection in the glass, lost in thought and unable to say anything. He had thought he would have a moment of peace alone, but suddenly a voice from behind broke the silence. "I trust you have a little time to spare for me." It was none other than Genovia. She entered the room with complete ease and said, "As you can see, it was exactly the attitude of someone who believed herself to hold the advantage." Genovia lifted her chin arrogantly and said in a mocking voice, "I thought I might lose sleep over that rude greeting you gave me earlier." Since she was a guest, Election at least invited Genovia to sit on the sofa out of courtesy, while he remained across from her beside the other corner of the desk. With that unpleasant look on her face, Election merely shot her a cold glance and said nothing. But in his mind, he was recalling what Pattinson had just reported to him. It seemed she had discovered the princess's secret. When he first heard it, Election had been so stunned that all he could ask was a secret. The head maid, fully aware of the seriousness of the matter, reminded him in a solemn voice, "The secret she has hidden all this time, your grace. The truth that the princess is not pregnant at all." And at those words, Election froze in shock, the stack of papers in his hand trembling. Pattinson had also been watching Elisabetta's reaction ever since Genovia threatened her earlier, and she reported every detail to Election. The princess turned pale after speaking privately with Lady Genovia, so I suspect she learned it somehow. Watching the woman who held the advantage sit there leisurely enjoying her tea, Election seethed with rage and sighed, but forced himself to hold back. If I kill this woman here and now, Elisabetta will surely learn the truth as well. His gaze could not have been sharper. Election bitterly regretted his own foolishness. I should have thrown her out much sooner. More dangerous than a venomous snake, she lifted her teacup to her lips, took a sip, and returned his stare with one just as poisonous. "Someone, please weaken this boss enemy for me. She's cunning and can read minds too." Genovia showed no fear as she provoked him. "You're thinking about whether you should kill me right now, aren't you?" She set down her teacup, knowing Election would not dare act recklessly against her. She pressed on boldly. "Would you really kill someone in this castle while your beloved wife is still fast asleep? This is a matter between the two of us," Election said irritably. "I advise you not to drag her into it. Stop." But of course Genovia had no intention of stopping. She mockingly asked, "So you really are trying to be a good husband now? How ridiculous." After taking another sip of tea, she added, "I thought only that foolish princess had feelings for you. Who would have guessed? The way you're looking at me now, it's as if you want to devour me alive." By this point, she seemed to have found a way to drive a wedge between them, and Genovia began speaking with loaded meaning. "No matter what, you should be careful, Grand Duke." Election looked at her suspiciously. "About what?" Covering her mouth with a faint laugh, she said, "Even I can see that you're slowly falling in love with the princess. But the princess herself doesn't realize it. Don't you think she's waiting for a chance to escape? Do you really think the princess will stay quietly by your side here in Rotia?" At that, Election was clearly affected. He maintained a cold, contemplative expression, his eyes fixed straight ahead, impossible to read. Genovia asked Election, "Do you truly believe that woman will stay with you in Rotir? Did she tell you she would never leave?" Then Genovia said, "Perhaps, that you should think carefully about what she actually said." Election remained silent. Instead, he asked her, "Have you ever wondered why I always let you do as you please? What happened 3 years ago?" Genovia visibly flinched. Election continued, "I never told anyone about it, because I was preserving your honor. Thinking of the disgrace you would have to bear, I chose to let it pass. And if it were not for the Irian family, I would have forbidden you from ever coming here again." Fear began to creep into Genovia's face. Back then, before leaving, she had asked Election, "I am the most beautiful woman in Vangelar. Do you think so too?" Election had answered indifferently, "I suppose so." Genovia had pressed further, "You think so too, don't you? Out of all the women you've ever met?" Election had replied, "I think so." But Genovia kept talking. "You weren't lying, were you?" Election glanced over and answered, "I have no reason to deceive you. Lady Genovia, The butler had warned Genovia, "My lady, you must not approach him while the dragon's frenzy is occurring. At such times, what he needs is blood, not sexual desire." Genovia's face had flushed red with humiliation. Back in the present, Genovia said, "You still think I'm as insane as you did back then, don't you?" She gave a sinister smile. "Who cares? As you can see, I've still kept my eyes on Rotir, and I still hope to chain you to my side." Election said nothing. He only asked her, "So you're still obsessed with those delusions?" Genovia frowned. "Delusions?" She stood up, her smile unchanged. "I only wish to watch you live the rest of your life in pain and loneliness." Grand Duke, turning away, Genovia said, "I'll leave today, just as you wished. Sleep well." Election watched her leave. The door closed behind her as Genovia stepped outside. Biting her lip, she muttered, "He really ruined my mood." He had once told Genovia, "Never do anything so reckless again." By now, she should have known that making a deal with dragons would lead to unwanted consequences if she pushed forward rashly. Genovia ground her teeth. "And yet you still dare to love?" she said venomously. "You're not even human. The tea in her cup was still unfinished. Left alone in the room, she sneered, "No one will ever love you." "I'm certain of it." Light spilled into the room, illuminating the piles of papers on the desk. By the time he returned, Elisabetta was already asleep. Andre, somewhat surprised, Elisabetta murmurò trausili, imisiu, Andra. "Please, take me with you." Calling to her, Election sat down at the edge of the bed. "Look at me carefully." Elisabetta turned toward him, confused. He reached out a hand. "Open your eyes. Tell me." Lifting her chin, he asked, "Who is the one you need in this world?" Grasping her shoulders, he said, "Who is it that you want, Elisabetta? You kept saying that the one you wanted was." His grip tightened on her shoulders, making her cry out, "It hurts! It hurts!" Only then did he suddenly come to himself. He let go of her shoulders. "I'm sorry." Lying down beside her, he realized that venting a little anger was not helping at all. She placed a hand on him. He was startled again. She leaned against him and drifted back to sleep. "Princess, he asked, "does the Emperor of Agen visit you in your dreams too?" She answered, "Sometimes." She shifted faintly. He reached toward her. "No matter how hard I try, I can't erase those things from her mind. A world that belongs only to those twins, protected by walls no one can penetrate." Pressing his forehead to hers, he suddenly realized, "I want to destroy that world." He bit his lip. Even the power of dragons could not erase the traces others had left upon her small body. In that case, he kissed her collarbone. Perhaps the answer was to cover her in marks of my own, marks no one could ever erase. Moonlight poured into the quiet bedroom. Sitting beside the bed and rubbing his forehead, he seemed to be wrestling with thoughts that would not let him sleep. Powerless against himself, he muttered, "I'm going insane. It's over. I lost my mind." Otherwise, after everything he had gone through, he should never want to bring another being like himself into this world. Yet his mind kept circling the same question. But if the Emperor of Agen really is still alive, wouldn't it be better to bind her to me by any means necessary? Thinking that, he smiled faintly as he looked at the sleeping Elisabetta. All his thoughts led to the same conclusion. He could no longer deny the truth. "You have made my heart waver, Princess." He rose from the bed and walked to the nearby desk. His eyes happened to fall on the scattered papers. Curious, he picked one up to examine it. It did not take him long to recognize what was drawn on the page, a magic circle. At the same time, in the southeastern region of the Greater Continent, at Riosa Castle, the summer retreat of the Rigel family, a man in a brown cloak appeared, descending the wooden stairs. His steps were hurried. He approached a tall figure, bowed his head slightly, and reported, "The Emperor and the princes of the Rigel family have returned safely." A voice from the other figure replied, "I should have driven them away." The man removed his cloak, revealing himself as Duke Fabian Bellator of the Agen Empire. He continued delivering the message. "His Majesty said you need not worry. He has said many times that you must focus on recovering from your injuries. Please rest, Your Majesty." That tall figure turned out to be Andre himself. The two of them sat together at the tea table and spoke. "Duke Conrad is said to have reached the Tin River while searching for the princess." Fabian continued to reassure him. "We did everything we could to pass word to the princess that he is still alive, so please do not worry too much." Andre did not answer. In his mind, he was thinking only of the Duke. He was the one who had repeatedly removed the power from the magic circle. There was no other explanation for why the connection between them had been blocked like this. "I'm certain I inscribed it on a hidden part of her body, but if it was discovered, then that means." His gaze darkened as his mind tried to reject the thought. "No, that can't be. If that were true, she would surely have been hurt." The thought left him even more miserable. Then Andre suddenly spoke after a long silence. "It seems the master of Rotur treats her rather well." He slowly voiced his thoughts and wishes. At the very least, he does not torment her. If he had ever exploited or abused her in any way. Andre unconsciously pictured Elisabetta's thin figure sobbing and thought, right now, "I only want her to come back quickly and take me home." Then he continued, "If, in that case, she has not become too dependent on him." Fabian set down his teacup and directly cut him off. "Your Majesty, she is the Princess of Agen." He denied it firmly. There is no possibility that she would love her enemy. Moreover, she could never be sincere in that absurd marriage. Andre stood up and said, "I was the one who told her to do whatever she could to survive. This must have been her final choice." He moved to the mirror and began speaking hesitantly. However, as you said, Rotier is absolutely no place for us. Andre looked at his own face in the mirror as though confronting his true self, especially because if I die, she may become Agon's ruler. Anything could cause her to become the last witch on Gradle. He turned back with fierce resolve. That is why I must bring her back, no matter what happens. Returning to Elisabetta's life, amid a lavishly set table, her gentle voice sounded out. "Are you angry, my lord?" He kept staring at the stack of documents as he answered. "Why shouldn't I be?" She looked puzzled. "But why?" He suddenly stopped and did not give his reason right away. Then he unexpectedly reached out and placed a hand on her forehead, perhaps because she was still running a slight fever. He looked at Elisabetta with tender eyes. "You are not allowed to leave your bed until I return." She replied in surprise, yet quite calmly. "That would happen often enough if I went back to Agon." He looked slightly flustered. He quickly regained his composure. "That can only happen once you have fully recovered and are healthy again. How could I not be angry when it's obvious I am not blaming you at all?" Elisabetta answered softly, "I'm sorry. I'll take better care of my health." He immediately rejected that. "I didn't say that because I want an apology from you." She promptly gave him a puzzled look. He always wore that expression whenever he said she did not need to apologize. Elisabetta did not dwell on it and changed the subject. "Anyway, what about the culprit behind the offering presented to the castle? If they've disappeared, have you caught them yet?" He answered, "I haven't even begun." She truly could not understand. "Why not? It's already been 4 days since you returned." He replied, "Because I've been distracted by your health." "Princess, are you asking because you really don't understand?" Elisabetta pushed her plate away and said petulantly, "I don't want to eat anymore." His face remained expressionless as he kept feeding her. "You're not allowed to leave your bed until you finish this meal," she said in surprise. "You remind me of Andre." Elisabetta could not hide her wistfulness. "If only the Emperor of Agon had treated me this kindly. He was just as stubborn about making me eat like this." She ate while lost in memory. "The longest he ever kept me confined in a room was a month. Would that be a long time for you?" He looked thoroughly displeased, but she failed to understand. "I want to ask you to refrain from mentioning his name in front of me." At last, he had to admit it. "It is not pleasant at all." Elisabetta suddenly realized, that's right. This man is from Vangeler, and he is also the commander of the enemy nation. Guilt began to sink into her. How foolish of me to think for even a moment that he was on my side. He spoke up. "You need to eat everything that is served if you're going to endure tonight." Elisabetta did not understand the implication and asked, "Endure what?" But he answered very calmly, "The thing you said you were confident about." He reached out and took her fair hand. Then he gently pressed a sweet kiss to it. "You must endure me." Elisabetta, together with the maid Abetsa, walked along the mansion corridor. Her mood was so heavy it almost dragged her down. In the end, he had made her finish everything. Elisabetta placed a hand on her stomach, recalling his words. "You must eat every dish served to you if you're going to endure tonight." He had even added earlier, "We cannot postpone this any longer now, even if you want to. And even if you beg you to stop halfway through, it won't help." At the thought, she could not help feeling embarrassed, her cheeks flushing red. "Tonight, Suddenly, someone appeared right in front of her. "Oh my, hello, princess." Genovia still wore the same haughty look as ever when facing Elisabetta. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" In one of the mansion's reception rooms, Elisabetta spoke first. "I heard you were leaving tonight." Genovia immediately replied, "As you can see, if I stay any longer, your husband will surely kill me." Genovia narrowed her eyes and looked at her mysteriously. "By the way, though, seeing you here with me now, I'd say my proposal looked a little tempting after all." Elisabetta set down her teacup and said, "There's something I need to make clear first, to keep this brief." Facing Genovia directly, she said bluntly, "I do not trust you." Elisabetta began questioning her. "You told me that if I gave birth to a child, you would send me back to Agon. Why would you take such a risk? It's obvious that you resent the Grand Duke, and more than that, you hate me. All you really need to do is pursue control of Rotier afterward." Elisabetta continued, "How would Election's successor be anything more than a means to evade the Emperor's decision regarding the inheritance? Why would you expect me to let my child leave with you?" "You know," Genovia said, still wearing her arrogant expression, "honestly, how can you be so stupid?" She gave a mocking laugh. You chose to save yourself by having a child. If it comes to that, what else would matter? Elisabetta immediately denied it. It does matter. This is my choice, so the responsibility lies entirely with me. She voiced her thoughts. If I were to have a child, I could stay in Rotir a little longer, and even if I returned to Agon afterward, it still would not necessarily be too late. The moment Genovia heard this, she let out a sigh. I truly cannot understand you. She spoke in agitation. Marrying the commander of an enemy nation is one thing, but your life was already in danger, so that at least made sense. But not only did you want to bear his child that day, you even wanted to raise that child with love before leaving. Are you too kind, or simply too foolish? Or perhaps, have you truly fallen in love with him? The question left Elisabetta speechless. She had to ask herself the same thing. How long had it been since she began finding meaning in a relationship built only on what the other person needed? Perhaps from the moment she reached out and tightly grasped his hand. She had thought that perhaps, from that point on, this had become inevitable. Elisabetta could not deny that Miss Genovia was right. She was fully aware of how immoral her actions, her feelings, and the outcome she sought truly were. Genovia continued pressing her. This is completely unacceptable, Elisabetta. Love? Have you gone mad? The more she spoke, the more agitated she became. Love? You, the woman blessed by Grandel, the most beautiful woman in the kingdom? Genovia laughed mockingly. And on top of that, you intend to raise a child before you leave? Do you really think that is possible? How unfortunate. Agon will never allow such a thing to happen. A flash of fear crossed Elisabetta's face. What have you done? Genovia gave a sinister smile. I had no intention of making this into a big matter, but her laugh sent chills down one's spine. Elisabetta turned deathly pale, cold sweat pouring from her body. Her trembling hand covered her mouth as she tried to confirm what she had heard. What? Terrified, Elisabetta pointed at Genovia. You just, wearing the look of someone victorious, Genovia threatened her. If you do not believe me, would you like to hear it from your husband himself? Soon, night had fallen, and the moon hung high, casting its light over every corner. Election appeared under the moonlight, dark red blood still staining his face. A sudden voice rang out. Did you truly kill them just because they tried to steal a little tribute? Genovia appeared there, provoking him again and again. How savage, just as expected of a dragon's child. She pretended to be astonished. You sever their heads quite neatly. Election calmly called out, Savat. Following the order, he walked toward her. We have written down everything we found, so please deliver it to His Majesty. Genovia quickly shifted her gaze toward Election. She continued in a mocking tone. You have killed many Agon soldiers with that sword, have you not? How could someone as noble as the Princess of Agon ever think of sleeping with a man like you? At those words, Election's hand unconsciously tightened around his sword. Genovia arched a provocative brow. What is it? Are you going to kill me again? Even though you will regret it if you dispose of me here? Regret is reserved for things you care about. Genovia gave a cold laugh. Is that so? Then what shall we talk about next? I heard that Agon's forces are conducting drills in Riel, yet it seems you never told the princess about that. Genovia spoke as if she knew everything. The two main pillars of Agon, Duke Fabian Bellator and Duke Conrad, are not dead either. Why would the men who were supposed to have died alongside the Emperor flee so desperately? There can be only one reason. The Emperor of Agon is still alive, is he not? She asked as if innocently. What do you think will happen if the princess learns that? Will you let her go? Election could only grit his teeth at the question. Genovia smiled with relish and pressed further. And does the princess even know what kind of man you are? He stepped in front of her and declared firmly, it would not change anything. Election said calmly, do you truly believe anything would change? He did not realize that Elisabetta had already hidden herself nearby and heard the entire conversation. Election glared and stated with certainty, even if Alice learns everything. Genovia struggled desperately as Election's brutal hand tightened around her throat. Blood and saliva mixed together at the corners of her mouth. The two knights following him, seeing his fury, spoke anxiously. Grand Duke, that is Duke Irian's daughter. Please, your grace, at the very least do this outside Rotir. If you do such a thing to the young lady within the territory. Before they could finish, Genovia curled her lips into a smirk and said, if you kill me, your wife's lies will be exposed. Election frowned and replied coldly, no. All I need to do is keep her hidden from every prying eye. It seems you all believe I will forever play Vangeler's loyal dog without asking for anything in return. If that is what you want, then you should at least know better than to provoke me. Genovia trembled as she sneered. There it is, your true nature. Then she suddenly called out, Alice, making him freeze. Do you see now? Election hurriedly turned to look. Alice quickly fled, showing him only the hem of her dress. He stood there stunned. Inside the castle, Alice walked on, wondering why would the two men who were supposed to have died flee so desperately alongside the Emperor. It must be because the Emperor of Agon is still alive, right? Alice trembled as tears fell. She collapsed to the ground, suppressing her sobs. The people of Agon, Andre and the Duke, they may still be alive. At last, I am no longer alone. I am no longer the only survivor. Just then, Ibetsa came downstairs. She was startled to see Alice collapsed on the floor. In concern, she asked, Princess, oh heavens, what happened? She came closer, taking her hand. Why are you crying? What has happened? Alice lifted her tear-filled eyes and softly called, Ibetsa. Stammering, she said, I have to go back as soon as I can, no matter what I must do. Agon has not completely fallen. They may be desperately searching for me. Nothing could matter more than that now. This is not the time for me to be swept away by something like love, by feelings unworthy of me. So I had to put an end to these foolish emotions. I should never have deceived myself. Ibetsa called out anxiously, Princess? Suddenly, a sound rang out. Ibetsa flinched and turned her head. Alice thought bitterly, that man, Election Kiston, was never on my side from the very beginning. Election approached and called, Princess, but she did not answer, only kept her head lowered as tears fell. He quickly strode over to her and placed a hand at her back. Then he gently lifted her into his arms. Election ordered Ibetsa, do not let anyone enter our bedchamber unless I permit it. Ibetsa blurted out in shock, oh dear, what am I supposed to do? Then Election carried Alice into their bedchamber and swiftly removed her cloak. Seeing that, Alice hurriedly tried to stop him. Election, wait. But Election did not listen. He kissed her collarbone, then whispered into her ear, I hope you have not forgotten, Alice, that we agreed to do this tonight. Alice's voice trembled as she spoke. Election, before we do that, there is something I want to say. Before she could finish, he gripped her thigh tightly, making her cry out in pain. Looking down at her as she lay shyly beneath him, he said, I told you that you cannot stop this, even if you want to. As he removed his clothes, Election said, it is time for you to receive what you wanted from me. He recalled Genovia's words. Do you really believe you love the princess and that she might return your feelings? That the two of you will live happily ever after? You do not doubt for even a moment that Alice will leave you. You will never be loved, not in this lifetime. I never dared hope for love. A life like that was never even my dream. But I cannot allow you to run from me. These feelings have always made me uneasy. Since the first day we met, they were never admiration, longing, or worship. It was only an overwhelming urge to possess you completely, so strong that all I wanted was to bind you with these two arms, so no one else could ever lay a hand on you. He gripped her waist, making her jolt. That desire has only grown day by day, until I can no longer tell where its limit is. But I fear I can no longer satisfy that desire. Election pressed a light kiss to her forehead. You were the one who always said you wanted this, Alice. You were the one who bargained for me first. So from now until forever, the only person you will ever need to save yourself must be me, and only me. Election kept his gaze fixed on Alice. Alice clutched the blanket and tried to stop him. Wait. Anxiously, she thought, is this really all right? I still have not confirmed it. Whether he truly stands on my side or not. He gently released her hand. For a moment she thought he had spared her, but he had not. He moved forcefully, and her face flushed red with embarrassment. Elisabetta let out an uncomfortable cry. Election, wait. This feels a little strange. She stammered incoherently. Just deal with it. There. Election slowly leaned over her. Face to face with her, he reassured her gently, if you do not want to get hurt. Her legs trembled as she answered, I'm fine, it's just. Election frowned. Not fine. Embarrassed. Elisabetta covered her mouth with her hand to keep from making a sound. Seeing that, Election pulled her hand away. Do not cover it. He softly kissed her hand. This is not the time. Election looked at Elisabetta with a hardened expression, as if she were stubbornly trying to resist. Then he moved again with force. Soon the room was filled with intimate sounds, mingling with ragged breaths and tangled motion, as though the entire space were being swept into a wave of drowning passion. Sitting atop him, Elisabetta trembled and panted, softly calling his name in broken gasps. Alexian. Her cheeks were flushed, her breathing uneven. Hearing him ask, "Does it hurt?" she answered in a choked voice, "It doesn't hurt, but—" Elisabetta wrapped her arms tightly around his neck and said softly, "It feels so strange. Everything feels so strange." Her eyes wavered between desire and hesitation. "Can we stop?" He answered in a low, resolute voice. There will be no meaning in stopping now. And so Election continued, drawing a pained cry from her. Bracing one hand against the bed, he said softly, "At the very least, I want to feel satisfied by what you have wanted for so long." And so they began again, driven by desire and possession. Elisabetta thought deeply. "I can no longer contact my sister. We need to bring her back now. I cannot wait until autumn." Duke Fabian Bellator camped north of the Tin River. A feeling beyond words, a strange wave, spread through my entire body. His back was covered with the scratches she had left. At last, he has given me what I had long desired. With that, I crossed the river and could never return. Even as I heard my younger brother's voice in my mind, my arms were wrapped around the shoulders of our enemy. Election breathed harshly, veins standing out on his face. That is right. If I were rational, although I'm fully aware of the tragic consequences of my actions, I would still find every possible way to draw on the woman who was once beyond my reach and drag her down into the abyss of despair. Election remained dazed until Elisabetta called out softly, "Election." He looked at her with eyes clouded by desire. But since when had I ever obtained something more valuable than this in my life? Elisabetta, fragile and beautiful. The blessing of Grandel, the woman all of Agon seemed to be searching for. Now, without a doubt, she had become mine, the woman of Election Kiston. Decades earlier, before Election Kiston became Vangeler's loyal dog, a loud voice rang out in a shabby house. "What the hell is this?" The man shouted. "A hatchling, is it?" Seeing a dragon inside the house, he immediately rummaged through his pocket for something. A dragon? He pulled out a cross strung with red beads. Holding the cross out toward the dragon, he cursed. "Damn it, what rotten luck." He closed his eyes and prayed to God. "O Lord above, please allow this lowly life of mine to be spared for one more day." After finishing his prayer, he opened one eye. "Hm." Noticing that the dragon did not attack, he muttered, "Hm. Most dragons attack humans the moment they see them, but you seem different." He dropped to one knee and nodded to himself. "I get it. You are observing your prey, aren't you? You seem fairly useful." Seeing the dragon staring intently at the cross in his hand, he asked, "Hm, you want this?" Then he tossed the cross down in front of the dragon and said, "Here, take it. Go on. Consider it a gift to commemorate our first meeting. You like shiny things, don't you? Just like crows. If you want more than that, come with me." The dragon picked up the cross from the ground and thought to long for something, to long for someone. Then the dragon spoke. "I want more." Hearing that, the man smiled mockingly. "Fine," he said. "From now on, if you want anything at all, then treat me well, your master. If you behave properly, I will give you anything you want." This was Election Kiston's memory, the first moment he learned both obedience and desire. Sunlight streamed softly through the window. Was this the fourth time their bedchamber door had been locked? It was as though they were trying to make up for lost time. Ibetsa spoke in quiet admiration. "The two of them are both quite remarkable." Hearing that, the other maid added, "Well, they're newlyweds, after all." She tilted her head up toward the sky and thought, "I only hope." The light of dawn gradually spilled through the window as a hand gently brushed through someone's hair. And that was Ibetsa's thought. Her grace will be all right. Elisabetta slowly opened her eyes. Before her was Election, holding a cigarette in his hand. He had just raised it to his lips when he stopped. Then he quickly moved it farther away. "It's only tobacco. It is not harmful. Would you like to try it?" She slowly sat up. The scent of smoke drifted toward the window. Elisabetta was holding the cigarette in her hand. Suddenly, a thought flashed through her mind. "Oh, this is—" All at once, her fingers slackened and the cigarette fell. Street, John S. Vaught. Is this the herb called St. John's wort? Someone had once placed a hand over a cup before her very eyes. You are only to take a small amount of this when you cannot sleep. This medicine can become poisonous if you take too much. And that cup of medicine had fallen to the ground. Meanwhile, that cigarette was handed back to Election. In a low voice, he explained that it was a kind of sedative. Then he softly asked, "Do you feel a little better?" Slowly, he raised his hand and touched her strands of hair. But Elisabetta still kept a blank face as she thought to herself. The thoughts kept surfacing in her mind. Am I upset with him? Maybe things would have been different if he had held me sooner. The image of those people rose before her again. Before Genovia Irian came to Rotir, and before I learned that he had hidden the news about Agan from me, perhaps. But then another thought appeared. No, don't think like that anymore. I can't turn back time. I need to be on my guard from now on. Then Election withdrew his hand. Bluntly, he asked her, what are you so deep in thought about? Elisabetta, whenever I speak to you, you make that face. Her face instantly flushed red. He silently stared at her for a long while. I've realized it again and again. You really don't like this very much. Election slowly moved closer to her face. Then he suddenly embraced her and bent over her. Elisabetta seemed to realize what he wanted, so she hurriedly spoke up. Wait, you promised before. This is the last time. But Election said nothing and pushed her down onto the bed. No matter how many times we come together, we are still just strangers. Elisabetta clutched his shoulder. There is no room for love here. The cigarette lay motionless on the floor. Perhaps I should only think of it as a temporary feeling, a feeling born from gratitude and a sense of stability. But even so, as our bodies cling tightly together, knowing for certain that one day I will have to leave him, I think it will hurt me very much. That evening, Election and Elisabetta were lying together in the bath. With a sorrowful gaze, he looked at her. There was a trace of sadness in it. Her eyes were tightly closed. He clenched his hand. Perhaps the best thing now was for the dragon's fetus to be nourished with magic. Water flowed out from the bath. If I remove this magic, then the child in her womb will not be able to absorb it. He stared intently at her as she lay in his arms. Suddenly, Elisabetta's lips parted. Election greedily sucked on her lips. Elisabetta slowly opened her mouth. Water began dripping from his hand. How ridiculous! Even though I have wronged her countless times and left so many marks on her body, I still feel shy when I kiss her. Election took hold of her chin. We crossed that line long ago. Right after that, he continued kissing her lips. There was no way to return to how things were before now. Suddenly, he froze. The image of Abetsa supporting her appeared in his mind. I have to go back whenever I can. At that moment, Election lifted his face. He clenched his hand and told himself, whatever I have to do, if she no longer needs me, then I will make her need me once again. And if I do that, this strange, unpleasant burning feeling will easily be washed away.